Good afternoon, members, and for those watching online at home, thank you for joining us this afternoon. A very warm welcome to you. So this is the first of today's overview and scrutiny boards of BCP Council. Without further ado, I'll ask our Democratic Services Officer, Joe Tyler, to give us some housekeeping information.
Thank you, Chairman. So please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. Please could everyone present follow these ground rules. Only speak when invited to by the Chairman. If accessing via Teams, always turn on your video function when invited to speak and state your name. Please use your microphones when speaking, and please mute or turn off your microphone when you are not talking. If you are accessing via Teams and would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the Raise Your Hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. Please refrain from using the chat function in Teams except for recording a proposed motion. If a vote is required on any issue, this will be carried out by a show of hands. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, you must exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the ground floor of the multi-storey car park. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Joe. Before we get on to the agenda, we have some changes to the board, and right on cue, I would like to welcome Councillor Stribley to the committee. And also Councillor Butt, who unfortunately offers her apologies for this afternoon. I would really like to thank two outgoing members, Councillor Cox and Councillor Fear, for their contributions to this board. And we hope our new members will enjoy the participation. Welcome.
I do apologise, Chairman.
That's okay.
Rude of me.
Okay, thank you very much. So, agenda item 1, apologies, Joe.
Thank you, Chairman. So for today's meeting, we have received apologies from Councillor Tony O'Neill and Councillor Judy Butt. And with item 2, substitute members, we have with us today Councillor Derek Borthwick, substituting for Councillor Tony O'Neill. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interest or any other interest on any of the agenda items? No, it would appear not. Thank you. And agenda item 4, confirmation of minutes. Does anybody have any comments on the meeting, on the minutes of the October? There are none, so we'll take the minutes as accurate. The action sheet, agenda item 4A, there are no outstanding actions on the action sheet, but I understand that there was a typo on one of the actions. You mentioned it. Yeah. You've got a note of that. Thank you. Thank you very much. So agenda item 5, public issues. Are there any public issues, Mr. Tyler?
Thank you, Chairman. There are no public questions, statements or petitions at present. Thank you.
Thank you. So it brings us to agenda item 6, scrutiny of the economic development strategy. And for this, I believe we have Councillor Broadhead to introduce this important paper. Councillor Broadhead is the Deputy Leader and also the Portfolio Holder for Development, Growth and Regeneration. Good afternoon, Councillor Broadhead. Would you like to introduce this paper to us? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Delighted to be here, albeit virtually today, to introduce what I would agree is a very important paper. It is has been in fruition for some time, our economic development strategy for the whole area. Really important document. Lots of people have been involved in putting this together, for which I would like to pay my thanks. And as with any strategy, it is never the end game. This will be something that we will develop over time. But what we've tried to do with this, and indeed what we've called our whole BCP Futures program, and that's a kind of a branding that we put around a lot of the work that we've been doing in this area, which covers obviously our economic development work. We've got our new urban regeneration company, which is Future Places, the Futures Fund that we've created. We put together a kind of an informal BCP Futures City panel with a number of key business individuals and people from the sector to try and draw extra experience together. Is to look forward, and that's precisely what we've tried to do with this document. I'll just talk briefly to some of the main aims that we've tried to draw out. There's a lot of information in there about a lot of the key sectors that we want to curate as we move forward. But what we've tried to do with this is as we've got our what we're calling our coastline of opportunity, is figure out how we can unleash the ambitions and potential of our whole area, particularly our business community. And that's why we framed this as a prosperity deal. So very much a little bit more transactional than we have done in the future. Economic development strategies quite often talk about what we would like to see happen and what we can do, but businesses play a part in this too. So framing this as a deal, we've made a few pledges in there of what we will do as a local authority, but then equally what we expect the business and economic community to put forward as well. So in terms of our side of the deal, if you like, we've drawn out 4 priority areas of action that we consider to be areas that need some extra added attention and focus at the moment. And those are listed in the document, but they are number 1, supercharging our business economy, as we've called it, which is focusing on increased productivity across a number of sectors, but in particular our small and medium-sized business community. Those are the areas where there's the most potential for growth, and we think that there needs to be some added focus at the moment. So that section is pretty self-explanatory. The second one, which has had a few names at the one time, I called it our kind of BCP superstars, but apparently that was a bit OTT, but there you go. We're now calling supporting our BCP exemplar industries, and that's recognizing that across the BCP area we've got some particular sectors that are world class in many areas, and it's not just sectors, it's clusters of sectors as well. So what we're trying to do is to give some real focus to those areas where we've got a very strong USP and areas that we've got growth, to work really closely with them and then champion them to the wider business community and beyond as well, which I think is really key for inward investment. The third part of our side of the deal is opening doors to prosperity, and that's about looking at the local economic conditions and making sure that we can unlock them in the best possible way. We are a fantastic area, and now we just need to make sure that we play a part in bringing together all of the different people that are working in the industry to try and pull it together. A really good example of that is our intervention recently in the Skills Commission that we've created for Dorset, recognising that there's a tremendous amount of work to do in the skills arena, but also that there are a lot of people that really want to get involved. So how can we actually sometimes be the first mover and pull together all of the talent that we've got? And then finally, on our side of the deal is the business matters at BCP, which is what we do on the ground. We've got a fantastic economic development department in the council. One of the things, I think one of the consistent things that I found in my time looking after economic development is the amount of businesses that say, Phil, you've got a really, really good economic development partner. We can pick up the phone. We know who to speak to. They help us, they put us in touch with the right people. So we've got that already. So it's building on that as part of our prosperity deal. The flip side of that is what we want want to do in that kind of more transactional nature is say to business, well, that's all we're going to do for you. What are you going to do for us? And that's that 7-point pledge that we've asked for the business community, which comes next, which is all about, number 1, commitment to training, number 2, increased levels of diversity across the workforce in the area, focusing on our climate agenda and our zero carbon targets, certainly before 2050. Being the champions collectively together of the BCP city region, selling ourselves to the world, because if one sector does well, if one business does well, then that translates into our entire place. And then the other pledges that are in there as well: commitment to new technology, business collaboration, and then finally lifting the whole quality of our business community across the whole area. So really, there's an awful lot more, Chair, in the document itself. But what we try to do is not just do a vanilla economic development strategy, which quite a lot of local authorities do, which signal areas that are important and say, yeah, we'll try our best. We've tried to make it a little bit more transactional. We've framed it as a BCP Futures prosperity deal because that's how businesses work, and they need to have clear expectations of what the local authority is going to do for them, and then in the same way we've got clear expectations for what they can do to help take our place forward as well. Happy to take any questions. As I've mentioned at the beginning, this is a document that will evolve over time, but I'm really proud of the work that's gone into this, and hopefully this will catch attention and show all of the things that we're doing in this arena.
Thank you very much, Councillor Broadhead. Certainly the paper outlines a very ambitious and fairly far-reaching set of aims. Be interesting to see what questions members have on this paper, and Councillor Dedman has indicated. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It is a question on item 8 on the report, which I must say is a jolly good report. Well done, everybody. I'm not sure, even when Councillor Broadhead read it out, is this a 7-point pledge from business or to business? Because it's very confusing. And it looks more to me as if we're pledging to business rather than from.
Councillor Broadhead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. No, I completely understand where Councillor Dedman is coming from. We've framed this as a deal to say, here are our expectations of what we want business to do, but it's with us as well. I think that's within that opening paragraph. It says that we will help in that pledge, but actually in the document itself, I think the opening paragraph within the actual before this section in the document says we want to work together with businesses, leading by example, and that's why we outline a 7-point pledge, and it is very much what we can do together, but our expectation from business as well, because we can't do any of those things by ourselves. We can't, help business. Well, we can help business, but we can't make businesses improve their climate agenda or offer increased levels of diversity and training. So it's something we've got to do together. But the idea is the 4 points that I raised at the beginning are our key areas of focus, and this is what we expect to happen together with the business community, that 7-point pledge.
Thank you. Any other members? Okay. Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a quick one, actually, and hopefully it's just going to be a bit of clarification on the BCP Council emerging priorities. Number 1 on the list there, it's on page 45, just for reference, of the agenda today, page 12 in the actual document. It says the big planned investment across 5 big projects in the city region, including an iconic cityscape. Now, hopefully you're just going to be able to allay some fears that obviously we've just had the vote in full council to go for city status, that looking for an iconic cityscape we're not going to be aiming for some sort of New York skyline or something like that. Could you just give a bit of clarification about what you mean with cityscape, please?
Councillor Broadhead, I think we've heard this question before.
We have heard it before, so hopefully the answer I give is the same one, Chair. Otherwise, that will be embarrassing, won't it? Well, the big plan, a little bit like what we've done in this economic development document. Because if I was going to criticise this document, I would say, well, actually, you brought 4 things out there. What about all the other things? Because there's clearly a lot more that you can bring out. But of course, all of that is in the background. The aim of bringing priorities forwards is that they're your priorities, and if everything's a priority, then nothing is a priority. So that document that we put together, the big plan, talks about the 5 big projects that need some added focus at the moment. So things like our seafront estate, things like infrastructure. We've actually brought out the regeneration of Poole, because that's an area that really needs some added focus at the moment, and we're facilitating that through Future Places, our new urban regeneration company. Not because we don't need to regenerate Bournemouth or Boscombe or parts of Christchurch, because clearly we've got regeneration across the area, but because one area needs special focus. And the reason for having the iconic cityscape in is to signify that there are some of our very urban areas like central Bournemouth and like parts of the regeneration of Poole, but mainly actually central Bournemouth, which are already emerging as a bit of a cityscape. And just to put some added focus on those areas, and that's not about making the whole of BCP urban. Quite the contrary. We've also brought in there our seafront and the protection of our more rural areas as well. But it's just bringing forward certain areas where we want to put added focus in. It's pretty much tied into our regen agenda as much as anything else. So you're right to raise it. It's not about cityfying the whole area. It's about focusing on areas that can be more urban and more city-like, and trying to foster that.
Any other members? Oh, Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. I can't say I'm convinced by that, actually. It was a very good politician's answer, because you didn't answer the question until the end. But you did answer, which is good. I actually polled a lot of my residents and said, apparently, one of the top 5 priorities for this council is to create an iconic cityscape. I didn't have a single resident who came back and said, yes, that's a jolly good idea. That's what I think we should be doing too. So, whilst I understand you're talking about central Bournemouth, I wish you'd say so, because my residents don't want to live in an iconic cityscape. They want to live in the town that they live in. And I think that needs to be recognised. So I'm really disappointed that you keep persisting with the iconic cityscape as a priority, because I don't believe that's the priority of the residents. I'm also disappointed that we're nearly 18 months on since we first heard about the big plan, when you brought it forward in June, when you first tried to change the administration, and this hasn't been consulted on with the public, which is in complete contrast to the corporate strategy, which went out to consultation in a matter of weeks and wasn't adopted until it had been consulted on really deeply. And yet we're seeing these terms used in all sorts of documents as if they are adopted, and I'm really disappointed that we haven't actually done that. So I'm interested to know why you haven't asked the public about it. I'm a bit concerned about a little bit of spin in it, which suggests in the introduction that we are within 90 minutes of Greater London. Nobody gets off the train at the, in fact, most of the trains don't stop at the first bit of Greater London. We are not. We're 2 hours and 7 minutes if you're very lucky. And if you're unlucky, it's closer to 2.5 hours. So I wish we'd be a bit more honest about being a couple of hours from London, because nobody wants to go to, wherever the first stop is, if they're a business. And finally, I love the sentiment of this. I absolutely do. But it does feel like a document for a document's sake, because it doesn't do anything. And I can see Chris slightly smirking, because I know that what's going to follow is an action plan. But come on, what are we actually going to do? And I don't see. So my first instinct when I read this was, so you expect businesses to increase productivity and salaries. How are you going to do that? We don't have the role to do that. So I don't quite understand what this deal is. I know that that's the language that works, but how are we going to make this happen? And if it doesn't happen, then what? What are you going to do to the businesses that don't increase their productivity? Because this then will have failed. And I would hate to see a document which is given so much profile, and which I'm assuming the business event in a couple of weeks' time is going to be promoting, which doesn't have the ability to deliver. Because that would be a real disappointment, I think, for the whole area. The final point is, you talk about the green agenda. I didn't see anything in this, unless I missed it, about a commitment to work and deliberately seek out local businesses for our interactions, so that we are going out there to promote, to have in our supply chain local businesses. That, I think that's a shame it's not there, and I'd be really grateful if you could consider how that could be weaved in.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. It sort of touches on a number of the points that I want to raise, but I won't do that just at the moment. I'd just like to give Councillor Broadhead an opportunity to respond to those points. Thank you, Councillor Broadhead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. There's a lot in there. We spend an awful lot of time talking about the big plan. So what we are here today is to talk about the economic development strategy that's in front of us. So you know my thoughts about the big plan. I've mentioned earlier on that if you want to move things forward, you need to be bold in certain areas. To reiterate the phrase, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. The corporate strategy is great. It's got about 4 million lines in it. It is not going to be the thing that's going to catch the attention and try and put you on the stage, particularly around inward investment and trying to drive areas forward. So I'm unapologetic about going hard on some areas because I do think that is the right thing to do. We will be having bigger conversations actually as part of what we're calling the big conversation coming soon around what comes next out of all of that. But we've had to put something together and broadly speaking, I hear a lot of people talking about it, which is precisely what we want them to do. With regard to the strategy itself, there's always this kind of ballet that we play, don't we, Chair, around you put forward a strategy, which is the kind of high level stuff that you want to do, what is important, what are the key things that you want to bring out, and then the criticism is, but where's the detail, where's the delivery? And as Councillor Slade herself pointed out, you do a strategy first and then you put the delivery plan reacting to that strategy. So of course what comes next will be, how do we put this into action? That's not what any strategy document is designed to do. The downside, however, of many strategy documents, as I alluded to earlier on, is I've been involved in the preparation of many strategy documents over the years, of many economic development strategy documents. There's a tendency that they can be a little bit too vanilla, and if you ask me a standout economic development strategy from a local authority that I've seen, I'd struggle to pick one, because I think the mistake quite often they make is try to say that absolutely everything's important. So we have tried to do a little bit different here, and I'd actually challenge the idea that there's nothing really in that, because as I highlighted at the beginning, we have brought out 4 areas that we are going to be really throwing a tremendous amount of weight behind. We could have just said business is really important, we want to support all businesses. That's clearly true. What we've actually done is said, when it comes to specific size businesses, we want to put some extra focus on our small and medium sized business community, because at the moment that's the area that needs the most attention, that needs the most growth. So that is different from what happens in other areas. We've also said productivity is our number one barometer for what we think success looks like. And as it says through the deal, we put an action plan in that we want to be the top 20 ranked city region in terms of productivity by 2026. I think that's quite a bold statement. That's quite a bold ambition. So yes, there will be a lot more coming, as with any strategy, when you get to the delivery phase. But actually, I think the argument that we've been a bit dry in here is precisely what we've tried to avoid. By A, making 4 areas that we want to draw out, and B, make it a little bit more transactional as well, because we can't do this alone. And I think there's a real power in saying to businesses, well, we're going to step up and provide a more, as we've tried to say to a lot of business partners, a more concierge service to you in the future. But we're going to need something in return. We're going to need you to be a BCP champion. We're going to need you to help increase your diversity, increase your training, increase your commitment to the climate agenda. And I just think that's the right thing to do.
There were a couple of points that Councillor Slade made which you haven't answered, but in terms of the big plan, why weren't our residents asked about this? There's been no consultation on it. Just for information, we do have that on the ONS forward plan, which we haven't actually got a date for, so we will be discussing it. I share Councillor Slade's concern that we are going down a route which has not been put to the population. Do our residents really want to live in towns, or do they want to live in a cityscape? That is an issue. It's been bubbling along for a long time. It's about time we actually did consult on it, and then to enable us to move on, so we all understand and there's no questions. But I know Councillor Howe wants to bring it, but I'd like to just, because the points I'm going to ask you about, Phil, really do relate to the ones that Councillor Slade has made, and they are that, yes, this strategy, no one, I think, could argue that all these things in this strategy are good things to be trying to achieve. There's no doubt about that. but are they achievable, and are we raising the expectations of the business communities in the things that we're saying? So and I understand that we haven't got the how, because that's the big question I've got. How are we going to do this? Can we afford to do this? How are we going to do it? And that bit's going to come later. But we will be raising expectations, and we will need to understand that when this strategy is implemented, that it's actually working. And given some of the objectives in this strategy, I have to say, have we not pushed it a little too far, particularly in the areas, for example, supercharging our business community? And when you get through the paper, it talks about how the council is going to arrange some special financing and arrangements, some kind of innovative financial arrangements. I'm not sure what that really means. But, there is an area, for example, the business is going, oh, hang on, there's some money coming here from somewhere to help us with our moving forward. What do these very colourful words in this document really mean? Because, it's all about the world and the world stage and all the rest of it. And I was delighted, I have to say, to hear you say that, the businesses can just pick the phone up and talk to us. And that's great. Well, I tell you something, I wish my residents could pick the phone up and talk to people in this council, because they have great difficulty. So, are we trying to run before we can walk? We're a new council, huge ambition. Of course, that's a good thing. But have we got the infrastructure? Have we got the organisation in place to deliver this kind of strategy that you're aiming for? Now, one of the key points here is, of course, do we have the resources and expertise within our business team? And do we need any more resources in order to implement this strategy? What is the bill for this? And how, once we've allocated that money, how are we going to monitor it to see if actually it's producing some value? So some rather broad questions there, Phil. And I see Chris is nodding his head wildly, dying to get in and answer those questions, I suspect. Thank you.
I'll bring Chris in a minute, because he will be able to talk much more eloquently about all of the stuff that this can and should lead to. But I'd really challenge anybody to point to something in this document that you think is singularly unachievable. I'll give an example. Over the last 12-18 months, we have, in extremely difficult circumstances, given out over £160 million worth of grants to our local businesses, in particular businesses, charities, and all that kind of stuff, but predominantly businesses. And we've done that not in a way that it was just simply passporting, but we've tried to use that opportunity at every single point to think, how are we going to move our businesses forward? How are we not just going to survive the pandemic, but how are we going to come out of it better than ever? And, we've had examples like our Bounce Back Challenge Fund. We're still putting together our additional restrictions grant scheme, Stream 4, which will be going in even further, looking after some of the key sectors that we talk in this, helping them to think of really innovative ways to help, not just bouncing back, but, going even further. We've done all of that, and I think we've done it tremendously successfully. So this idea that we're a new council where we've got to learn to walk before we can run, well, I think we've demonstrated quite a lot of running over the last 12 months in particular. And I make no apologies for being bold in this vision. I'm rereading the document now. I'm not sat looking at any of these where I grimace and think, oh, crikey, are we actually going to be able to achieve that? Because, a lot of it we're doing already. What we've tried to do in this is not say we're going to go 200% more than we're already doing in a lot of these areas. What we're actually doing is giving some focus on some of the areas where we're going to have some, specific, a specific kind of laser focus on. But if you can point me to a section, Chair, that you think is singularly unachievable, great. But actually, I think most of this is not just the kind of thing we can do and should do, but actually the things that we've been doing already.
Well, thank you. Of course, our task here is to test and challenge the proposals that you're putting forward, and that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
I'm just saying, if there's examples in there, you think.
And the answer is very much in how you're going to go about doing this, which we haven't yet seen. All I'm just saying is that when you look at areas like supported BCP exemplar industries. Now, how many staff have we got in order to do that? You know, how many staff have we got to supercharge our business community? I mean, the business community is actually huge. And how many on the team have you got to do that? And how much money have you got in order to do it? I'm not saying we can't do it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be trying to do it. I'm testing to see if we're actually in a real world here at the moment. So,
yeah, I get where you're coming from now. Okay, Chris, do you want to input at this point, because we haven't plucked all of this out of the air? This has been, you know, driven by our ED guys as much as anybody else, and there's a lot of. Yeah, you're quite right. We're building up a lot of expectation in here, but it is based on the sound principle that we are going to be able to deliver this. So, Chris, if you want to add a little bit more.
Thanks, Councillor Broadhead, and thank you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. It's striking the right balance, isn't it, between having the ambition and having a target to aim for, but also basing it on reality. I'm immensely proud of my team. We have about 10 people, give or take, in the team, and some of those have been brought in through flexible finance that we've been able to achieve through external funding, but most of it is core funded and has been supported and continues to be by the administration and by the leadership here as an important priority. So we're in a position where we've got some great people in the team, and actually recruiting a couple more in the month or so to help, particularly around inward investment attraction. And you know, a number of us have been in the room with me talking about this before. The role of economic development, other than championing our business community and working with them to achieve the things that Councillor Broad has identified, is actually to facilitate a lot of this. We're the gateway, we're the concierge into the council, we're the business voice into the council. So actually, you don't necessarily need hundreds of people. What you need is the relationships with the people inside the council and outside to make these things happen and for these barriers to be released. So, for example, you might want to work with colleagues in estates or in planning or in highways, or, you know, from everything that, you know, from small things to large things. But the point of the team often is to be a brokerage, you know, and to be the barrier or the sponge between business and the council. And you know, sometimes we take the flak in that sponge from the business, and then we go and try and work out the problem inside, and we come back with an answer. Sometimes we're able to communicate it the other way, but the majority of the time it's about business relationships. And we also have dedicated staff who are responsible for the key sectors. So that's really important, because they're known as the key account manager for that sector. So anybody in those industry sectors or surrounding them, the supply chains as well, will go to those people who are visible on the stage locally, and indeed sometimes nationally, for their role they play in those sectors. And again, really critical roles within the team. So, you know, I think I'm comfortable at the moment that we have the resources. We can always do with more, but actually, you know, we know the pressures we're under, so we're grateful for what we've got. And you know, we do have you know, recently a finalist. The team were finalists in the LGC Award for the work they've been doing that Councillor Broad had mentioned earlier, but also further, you know, further than just the business support through COVID. So, you know, I think in answer to your question, Councillor Bartley, I'm confident that we've got the resources in place, but we will need to perhaps tweak the areas of focus to respond to the strategy and the action plan that's forthcoming. Now we're out of the pandemic, or at least moving away from it. The only other point I wanted to make was in relation to Councillor Slade about the supply chain. We have tried to link that throughout the document where we can. Clusters as we've come to know it. You know, the internal marketplace for BCP, the developing of local supply chains is all part of those key account managers who work within those sectors to make sure that the supply chain is there. And actually, one of the biggest examples that we've got kicking off shortly is around construction, where we've got a meeting of the construction industry with the lead for that sector to talk about some of the, obviously, the macro issues that are affecting all of construction across the world, let alone in BCP. But it's about understanding that supply chain to then help the development at the front end, which many of our colleagues are leading the way with. So that's an example again of how we work with the local supply chain and how we're trying to support it in whichever sector it's related to. So hopefully that answers your questions.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Howell.
Thank you. I mean, I agree very much with a lot the chair and Councillor Slade said. I mean, it's kind of, this document's kind of in the image of the portfolio holder, and said it makes sweeping statements, but without any specificity, we can't point to any things in here that aren't achievable because there's no action plan, there's no specific things that we can tie you down to and measure against. So it would be interesting to know when we are going to see that action plan. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, Chair, as coming to the committee, but I think it's really important that it does come to the committee. The portfolio holder says on the one hand, this is bold. On the other hand, we're doing a lot of this already. And the reality is that a lot of this work was started under the UA. It's being continued. This is really an evolutionary document, and it is pretty vanilla. There's not much in here you wouldn't expect to see in other authorities, and so it's quite difficult to comment on. I think the point I'd really like to focus on, I think, is the portfolio holders' statement and focus on productivity. Productivity is not necessarily a good thing. Productivity is not a good thing, if it involves creating products that are carbon intensive and disposed of readily and don't serve really the needs of the population. Productivity is not a good thing if it generates wealth for people living outside this area while not paying decent wages for people living in this area. And what I'd really like to see in a document like this, given our objectives in terms of climate change, is something that actually encourages our businesses to develop, so that they are producing products and services that are responsible in terms of our climate and environment. And I know when I was a portfolio holder, Bournemouth Town Centre BID were very keen to move in that direction and encourage that kind of approach within their area. And I think it's really important from an economic perspective as well that we move away from a seasonal economy, tourist economy, to an all-round tourist economy that actually sustains jobs throughout the year. You can look at the small business proposal and say that's great. That's a good thing. Promoting small business is a good thing as long as they fit into that criteria of being environmentally responsible. And you've got there a basis for moving forward and engaging the community and businesses in something that is an inspiring objective and something people can grab hold of and say we're all working together to produce. But the danger of a lot of these items in here is that they'll just get lost. This document will be put in a drawer. They're not specifically exciting or individual for anybody to walk away with and say that's going to be my focus for the next 6 months or a year. So I would like the portfolio holder to just speak about the small grants element. How much is there on an annual basis going into the small grants fund, and what's the maximum limit? What's the criteria for actually businesses applying for that? Thank you.
Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you very much, Chair. The short answer to that last question is that I don't know the detail of exactly how much is going into the small grants fund. We've spent the last 12-18 months really focusing on the kind of all of the COVID grants that have been coming in. What we are doing at the moment is exploring how we can replicate a lot of the success of that. I've been talking to the team recently and looking at some of the real successes of the grants that we've been issuing as part of the pandemic funding, and just seeing how much tremendous impact it can make, particularly to a lot of our smaller businesses. A little goes an awful long way. way. And I've said to the team, it'd be really good to get some case studies around some of those that, particularly through things like the Bounce Back Challenge Fund, because if you were to, kind of put a business case ratio next to those, I think we might see some, really big impacts from, what are sometimes quite small sums. It's always been very difficult in the past because of state aid rules and things like that. But again, that's going over a bit of an overhaul at the moment. So and then we've got things coming through like Shared Prosperity Fund, etc., which will impact this area. So I'll try and get somebody to come back to the team for you, Councillor Howell, regarding the current state of the Small Grants Fund. But what I can say is that we are going to be looking at we're going to try and explore some innovative ways to replicate some of what we've been able to achieve in these really unusual times in the kind of the more usual times in the future. I can't be more specific than that because it's just something that I would like to do, and we've got to explore what's in the art of the possible. Just on your point about productivity, I respectfully disagree. I don't think we live in an area which is particularly industrial. So when we use the term productivity, it's not about making cars or making plastic bags or anything like that. It's much more about making sure that our economic workforce is productive as possible. I'm unashamed, and I think economic growth is good. I know that the former administration weren't allowed to talk about economic growth. It was perceived to be a bad thing. It wasn't even anybody's title, but I think it is a good thing. Clearly, I would agree with you that you've got to temper that with all of the other things that we need to take into consideration, like sustainable growth and the climate agenda, etc. But I don't think it's a binary choice between looking after our area and the next generation and economic growth. I think they're actually they should be hand in hand.
Yeah, just to set out the order now. Councillor Howell wants to come back on that, which I'm going to allow, and then we have Councillor Dedman, we have Councillor Lewis Allison, and following that I want to bring in Councillor Andy Hadley, who's waiting on the Teams. Okay, when we get to the end of that, that's going to be the end of this debate. All right, and I'll close up. Okay, so Councillor Howell, thank you.
Yes, the portfolio holder tried to suggest there that I was opposed to economic growth, which of course I'm not. I'm opposed to economic growth, which is polluting or results in unnecessary burning of carbon and results in the production of products and services which are not necessary. So I'd like important to make that distinction. And I'd also like to point out that there are items in here like the Small Grants Fund, which turns out there is no funds because there is no money apparently currently, because it seems that neither the portfolio holder nor Chris can tell us how much money is. So I just wonder how many other things in this document don't really exist because they're just lines on the page at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dedman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I noted the comment about the previous administration. I think it's a shame that so many things are said about the administration which are not really valid. I've got 3 points here. I'm not sure in which order to put them, but they all come from this debate and the answers that have been given. I think I'll start with the comment from Councillor Broadhead, which comes out of the wider debate. And I would comment that myself, like Councillor Broadhead, I've seen a huge amount of reports like this from different councils, different areas, and it's very, very easy to make these worthy reports, and this is an excellent one of its kind. I do appreciate it. It is very, well, I was going to say it's very specific. There's one specific in here, which leads on to the next point I wanted to make. Initially, when this started, Chairman, I was going to actually ask about the constant use of this new modern term concierge. However, far from being a resident caretaker, as it would be in a nursing home, which, as everybody knows, I'm very intimate with, it clearly means something different. It means the gateway, or the concierge is holding the gateway, I gather. To me, that's something we should already be doing. And in fact, we are doing. As the chairman said, we can, all of us, phone up and ask for this. However, really, really good thing to put in a report. I think this is excellent to say we are going to do it and then almost just like that say, oh, and we are doing it. So that was another point. And the third point, which has come up throughout the debate, and these aren't particularly questions, Chairman, they're just my views, is we're talking about funding. There's mention of the Bounce Back Challenge. And my very serious point on that is that who will be agreeing these handouts and who will be scrutinising the handouts, given the confusion that we had previously in some of the sums given and who validated them. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm not sure there was a question there, and that's sort of going off onto some things outside this. Well, it's a very high-level strategic document. Councillor Lewis Allison, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree that this is a really good document, and I think you know, a lot of the vision is really, really positive. I do share colleagues' concerns about delivery, but hopefully when we see the action plan, we'll be able to comment and discuss that further. I wanted to talk about that this document has quite a lot of discusses quite a lot of the work we've been doing in Boscombe around the regeneration of Boscombe, the Towns Fund, the URC, and etc. I don't know if Council Board head saw, but this week we've seen that Boscombe was voted the 33rd worst place in Britain to live, and I wanted to give him an opportunity to sort of put on record to sort of challenge that, because I know that's certainly not something that me or my residents agree with. Also, the document talks about a challenging labour market, which has been brought into a starker relief given the impacts of a previously significant migrant labour workforce before 2016, which is basically a roundabout way of saying that the hospitality and tourism industry and foremost BCP relied quite heavily on an EU workforce. So I don't understand why the document just doesn't say that. But I'd also like to know, what are we going to do to sort of fill that skills gap? Because, you know, we're relying on that migrant workforce. Where are we going to get those workers from to sort of fill that skills gap? And finally, not really a question, but I just wanted to put on record that I'm a big fan of economic growth.
Thank you, Councillor Allison. I mean, regarding what you've asked, basically is a how question, and we've already understand that the how questions will come out when the plan is produced. So, you know, I think we need to just keep this at this very strategic level in terms of the debate. Councillor Hadley, can I bring you in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a couple of things I wanted to raise. It's always fascinating when you look at these documents and the ambition to become the 20th Centre for Cities study. And I then looked at, well, who else is a significant outlier in Centre for Cities? And it's Slough by quite a long way, Worthing, Swindon and Reading. And when I look at those communities, they're not ones I particularly want to emulate. I think it does come back to the question about what do we want BCP to look like and where do we want to be? And it is because in most of those cases there is quite a significant manufacturing in industry, but it's not the place I want to be. But it also talks about things like efficient public transport for suburban areas, about trying to improve how people can get to work in order to drive a good economy. And it's also about how not just about how the council works with business. I think in paragraph 8, turning it around so its businesses will work with the council rather than the other way around would clarify that little issue. But how we get businesses to work with businesses without creating a massive city centre at the centre, and how we can facilitate that, I think, is a really important strand. The things I thought were missing, one was in the equalities assessment. There was something around particularly armed forces leavers and those in the lower socio-economic groups, and that didn't appear elsewhere in the report. And I kind of thought if they'd been through the equalities assessment and that was highlighted as something we need to concentrate on, why we're not concentrating on it. And the other is in terms of the KPIs, and there's nothing about the environment in there. So our commitment to 2030 and our commitment for the whole BCP area to 2050, that really should be a KPI. We should be making positive progress, not waiting till 2049 and panicking. So, you know, making it up and front and central of our plans to say, in order for us to move forward as a community across BCP, we need the business community to step forward. And you know, I think it is, as Councillor Howe was saying, it is about encouraging green industries and that growth in that sector to move us forward. So just really comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on any of that, Councillor Broadhead?
If I could, Chair, just very quickly, and thank you very much for the debate. Just a couple of comments on some of the comments that came in. Councillor Dedman's point around the concierge service. The reason we put that in, Leslie, is we spoke to, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, we have a lot of really positive feedback around how we interact with our business community as a council, you know, and a real credit to Chris and Adrian, the team, for that. And one of the things that they kept saying to us was, and I've actually spoken to businesses that have relocated into the area, and big businesses that are growing, that are focusing their growth on this area. OnBuy being a very good example. It's one of the fastest growing businesses in the UK. It's kind of like challenging Amazon, but in a much more ethical way. They've got 2 bases, one in Manchester, one in Poole and Bournemouth, and they're focusing more of their time and effort in Poole and Bournemouth precisely because we're laying the red carpet out for them, and we're talking to them, and we're trying to, as Chris pointed out, facilitate. And so many businesses have said the reason we like working in your area is because you offer us a service that others don't. You know, it's often hard to even know who to speak to in other local authority areas. Where you get it, you want to talk to us, you want to help us, and that's all we need. We just want to know, as Chris pointed out, sometimes where we need to go. We don't want you to do everything. We know you're not going to be able to do everything. So we've already got that reputation as offering a kind of a more concierge service, and I see it as a little bit like, you know, the concierge in a nice hotel. You go downstairs and can you do something, and they go away and find the solution rather than the problem. So actually bringing that out and shouting about it, I think is something we should do. It's not something that we haven't done and we need to do in the future, but there are probably a lot of people that might be thinking, where should we relocate our business? Where should we grow? And if they know that there is an area that's saying, come here, we're going to look after you properly, then, you know, and they can back that up with talking to other businesses that say, you know what, they really do that. I think that's a really, really positive message. So that's the reason for bringing it out. We're already doing it. We want to do more. And actually, we want to shout about it. I'll take the opportunity, if I may, Chair, to completely agree with Councillor Allison. That report around Boscombe being one of the worst areas to live in, it's a load of hogwash, if you ask me. It's done by lazy assumptions for people that don't know the area, don't live in the area, don't interact with the area, because it's just an easy, lazy characterisation. Boscombe is one of the kind of most culturally diverse, trendy, growing places that we've got. We're doing amazing work with the Towns Fund, and actually, not that I would ever normally suggest this, but if you actually look on social media and the comments under that report, you will see the vast majority of people going, I don't know what we're talking about, but Boscombe's buzzing, Boscombe's great, people need to grow up and start living in reality. So I share his optimism for the future, and we're going to do great things in Boscombe. He asked a specific question about what we're going to do around the skills gap. You know, I'm really passionate about the skills opportunities that we have. I'm trying to view it more of an opportunity rather than gaps. So much so that, you know, in the last cabinet cycle, we created our skills commission for Dorset, recognising that somebody needs to be the first mover to pull this skills agenda together, recognising there's a lot of people that really want to get involved. We've also just created a lead member specifically around levelling up and skills to give some absolute focus to the skills arena, and we're also going to be doing a further paper on levelling up and skills in the next couple of months, and it is brought out in this report. So what are we going to do? Well, create a skills commission, create a cabinet member specifically for it, and then get stuck in and do it. And then the final point, just to address some of Councillor Hadley's point, and could I just say a big thank you to Councillor Hadley, actually, because you made the point, Chair, that this is the strategic paper. This is about the high level stuff, and the feedback that I value at that high level discussion is what would you do differently, not where's the action plan, well that clearly comes later, but actually what do you think is missing. And credit to Councillor Hadley, we might disagree on stuff, but he always answers the question. So his points are, well, why isn't there more about armed services and the lower paid in there? I think that's a really valid point and something we may take away. And also, are our KPIs good enough? And again, really good question to ask. And thinking about it, we might just wish to beef up our KPIs a little bit more in the area. But I think he's one of the, he's got the aim of this, which is that this is a high level strategy document. The putting into action comes later. This is the stage where if you're not happy with some of the, strategic parts of it, tell us and we can try and fix it. So those 2 points I'll certainly take away, but, more than committed to bring the action plan back as and when it comes to fruition.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Just a couple of points. Councillor Howell mentioned the plan I was referring to was the big plan, which is on the agenda, forward agenda, not this action plan that's emanating from this particular strategic document. So I just wanted to clarify that. The second point I'd like to make is that some time ago there was, well, not that long ago, there was a really big push on the Dorset industrial strategy, and it was led, I think, by the LEP and very closely with Bournemouth University. I don't think I've seen too much of that work reflected in this paper. And I'm just wondering, because you're talking about things that may be missing, and maybe that is an element that needs to be looked at to see if there's any synergy with work that's already been carried out. And there was a lot of work put into that, a lot of effort. So I just highlight it as something you may wish to look at. And thirdly, we obviously will be looking forward to the plan that you're going to produce. I don't know how long it's going to take to produce that, but I'm not sure if you mentioned it in the report, but we will certainly be looking out for it. And we will be trying to relate the strategy to the plan that falls out of the strategy to make sure that the two are linked and coherent. But with that, I'd like, and I think the quality of the strategy has been acknowledged by a number of people today. So I'd like to thank those staff involved in that. Thank you very much. And I would also wish you luck. I know that the team is held in high regard by the business community. And I have seen, if you're lucky enough to go to one of the presentations that you make, then you realise just how much work is going on behind the scenes that isn't evident to most people unless you're fortunate enough to get involved in one of those briefings. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Shepherd, and your team. It's much appreciated. And we will look forward to seeing the plan when it's produced, and no doubt we'll be inviting you back again to talk about it. So thank you very much. I'm going to close this debate now. Thank you. So this brings us on to agenda item 7. Is everybody all right comfort wise, or does anybody want a couple of minutes? So everybody's okay, all right? I'm not twitching in my chair like I normally am, so we can carry on. To agenda item 7, seasonal response review, and that covers all the activities of controlling, hopefully, the things going on down at the seafront and other areas over the summer period. And I'm not sure who. I can see Sophie there. My paper says I'm going to call on Kelly Ansell, the Director of Communities, to briefly introduce the report. And I see that Councillor Mohan Iyengar is also here, as the portfolio holder of tourism and active health. And Sophie, the head of seasonal response, is going to contribute. I'm not. Are you introducing this, Sophie, or is Kelly Ansell going to? Okay, I've got Mohan. You're going to introduce this? Thank you. Okay, call upon Councillor Iyengar. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members. This is not a new subject to everybody, or hopefully it's not a new subject to everybody. This is a end of term review of what we're calling the seasonal response for summer 21, about the arrangements for our preparedness and our response to, in general, the seafront, but not quite confined to the seafront, and how well we didn't respond, anticipate, and then respond to and deal with effectively the influx of both residents to the coast and visitors, and how well we, in a sense, gave people that feeling of safety, gave that feeling of comfort, and also helped protect in general our place, our landscape, our natural environment, and so on and so forth. We're very pleased to be here. As you know, we've had a strange couple of years. It barely needs me to say that to anybody in this room. Summer 2020 was, of course, difficult, but of course, COVID was new to the world at that time, very new to the world. And of course, we were all learning our way. Summer 21, we had the benefit of a year of living with COVID and masks and distancing and washing hands and sadly lockdown as well. But 2021 was no less challenging for it, because we were there with more knowledge, but it was erratic in so many ways, and not least the weather as well. So it was unpredictable. But we still had to deal with something that was huge. And also, I'd add, in 21, with the expectations being somewhat higher, that we would actually be able to cope very, very well. And that's what the team are having to deal with. We have the benefit of the government money, and there's no doubt, and let's be clear right at the front, we had a good amount of government money to deal with this, a big total of £3.5 million. Of course, what came with that, as well as the expectations, was the obligation to use it wisely and be seen to be doing so in a transparent way. We opened with a councillor briefing, which was well attended, I must say, and I thank all members for this. It was well attended in March, and then another one, I think it was towards the end of April, we had a second one just the other side of Easter. And then, of course, we've had a visit to Overview and Scrutiny Board already, and very, very pleased to be back here. The summer response plans have been critically acclaimed by people who've got no vested interest in just giving us warm words. It's been critically acclaimed. It's now the subject of one of the topics of the peer review by the Local Government Association, who are embarking on their work within the council. And what I'll also say, there's been some fabulous learnings, just speaking parochially for us as the council here, there's been some fabulous learnings over this summer by virtue of what's been done in terms of things like how well we can take our co-working with our partners to the next level, often in very challenging circumstances, and even something as humdrum as data and statistics. Now we've suddenly got a body of high quality data on literally who comes, when they come, what they do when they come, and so on and so forth, which we somehow didn't have before. And as you probably know, coastal authorities in general tourism is an absolute bleak landscape of good quality data, shall we say. We're here today to invite observations, invite critique, and can also say there's something here about this whole topic which is, dare I say it, non-party political, because it's something which is to do with fundamentally the reassurance, the safety, the well-being of all our residents, our businesses, and the natural environment as well. So in that spirit, I absolutely welcome comments. Thank you, Chair. And then, if I may, I'll hand back to you and then back to Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I understand that Sophie's got a presentation for us. Is that right, Sophie? Shall we just go straight into the presentation then?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just having a quick moment of IT issues. I shall share that now. Hopefully you should all see my screen shortly. Okay. I'm hoping that you can all now see this presentation. So thank you, Councillor Iyengar, and thank you, Chair. As has already been said, this is a fantastic opportunity to review a very, very busy season and a very, very busy delivery. So I'm just going to take you originally through some background. Obviously, we've been to Overview and Scrutiny earlier on this year to look at what it was that we were looking to deliver, and we're now going to let you know what it is that we've actually delivered. But the background on the service is that we did have an unprecedented 2020. As such, we needed to plan for an equally precedented 2021. We wanted to make sure that we engaged our partners. Visitor influx is something that is impactful on both the local authority and a number of different directorates within the local authority, but also then our partners in health, our police partners, and our wider partners as well. So other blue light services, and also elements like Dorset Council, who have adjoining areas to us. So making sure that multi-agency response to that visitor influx was embedded was the first element of the seasonal response tactical delivery plan. We are very fortunate in the fact that we have had a significant amount of additional funding this year, so just shy of £3.5 million. And what we took from that was the ability to take a real risk and impact based approach. So looking at what the visitor influx means for us in our core services, what that means for us in pressures, and therefore how we can mitigate it. So our core risks that we identified were things like litter, and then the increase of litter in our open spaces and seafront locations, antisocial behaviour, traffic management and congestion, cleansing, partnership working and delivery. So we looked at the service enhancements that we could deliver with the funding that had been allocated and also our joint working protocols. The delivery of that was the creation of a multi-agency command centre that opened on the 29th of March and ran through until the 19th of September. And that was in line with predicted data influx for numbers of visitors and also key events that did get postponed. A number of key events got postponed over the summer period, later into the summer because of the lockdown roadmap. So it's quite key to say at this point, when all of this was created between sort of February and March, we had an understanding, a vague understanding of what that roadmap looked like, but still quite a significant amount of uncertainty. So making sure we had core services that were agile in their approach and scalable based on demand was really key to delivery. So a general overview of the summer season 2021. So as Councillor Iyengar said, weather this year has been a challenge in predicting. Unusually, it has not been, we haven't been able to rely on forecasting, and we've had changes for the weather hour by hour in some elements during the summer. But we have had 3.75 million people through peer approach. So peer approach, we see through our data surveys and through our independent visitor surveys that the majority of people that visit the seafront-based locations in BCP do come through peer approach locations. And we have footfall sensors there where we can see exactly how many people are coming through. We've had them there for a number of years. So 3.75 million people through peer approach. That's nearly 1 million more than we had in 2020 and over 400,000 more than we had in 2019. So what this is showing us is we do have a thriving tourist economy. You know, we know that we've got 17,000 jobs that rely on our tourism, and we also know that we have the UK's best beach. So it's unsurprising that we are having an increasing level of visitors year on year. We did have a difference in weather this year. So the majority of our summer mid to low 20s, but we did go up to sort of 28 degrees. Peaks in 2020 saw us at 31 degrees. And our two really, really busy weekends that we talk about quite a lot within this presentation, the 12th and 13th of June and the 17th and 18th of July, were with those peak temperatures around 27, 28. So in those busy weekends in June and July, we had just shy of 250,000 people through peer approach. So our busiest day in 2020 saw just over 50,000 people through peer approach. The 12th and 13th of June and the 17th and 18th of July saw between 53 and 58,000 people per day through those through the peer approach gateway. It was a significantly busy 2 weekends, and what we had also seen is periods of poorer weather leading up to those spikes. Our national headlines that told us a heat wave was coming, and therefore we knew that we were going to have an influx of visitors. There was a massive amount of learning between those 2 busy weekends, so we have been delivering at quite considerable pace. And learning from the 12th and 13th of June allowed us to further deliver on the 17th and 18th of July. Elements such as putting our tow trucks out in key prominent locations as a deterrent early in the morning, increasing our civil enforcement officers and changing some of our operational responses to delivery so that we could make sure that we were learning and so that we can make sure that we were as effective as possible as a multi-agency partnership. Some facts of note which are really, really interesting is that over 50% of our visitors have told us in an independent survey that they chose to come to BCP on the day of travel. 74% of those visitors have also stated that they travelled to the beach by car. So we've got a significant amount of people who are making quite last minute decisions on coming to the conurbation and also travelling by car as opposed to using more sustainable methods of transport. So 2 really interesting elements when you're looking at scalable responses and looking at putting in services that are predicted through data influx. So although we had a range of different data sets available to us, you know, those live data sets where we were monitoring the M3 and the M27 for vehicles coming down there were completely invaluable in then making sure that we had the right responses on the ground. I'm going to take you through a range of the different services that we talked about the enhancements of before and therefore the delivery. But just before I do, the Seafront Survey is a really interesting tool to look at the satisfaction across our seafront locations. So a range of different areas have been consulted on. 1,100 people were consulted on as well. It gauged methods of travel, it gauged the demographic of people, and it gauged general satisfaction. So the survey in front of you shows the satisfaction figures, which are by far extremely positive. So elements around people feeling safe in the sea. We have an RNLI service that we contract to make sure that our visitors and our residents are safe in the water. Safety and security in the beach. We've enhanced our security services, we've enhanced our on-the-ground patrolling officers, and we've worked massively in partnership with the police, who are also here today, and I'll introduce you to Inspector A.D. Thompson later on, to make sure that our visitors and our residents feel safe. Even our cleanliness of our toilets, which is at the bottom of this list, has an 87% satisfaction rate. So on the most part, our visitors to our area are happy with what we're providing. Now, that's something that is really, really positive, both in core service delivery and within the enhancements that we've been able to provide this summer. Looking at litter, litter was something that had a significant influx in service enhancement. So in previous years, we've seen some serious issues and problems collecting waste when we are at our busiest. Getting a large refuse vehicle down a seafront location when the prom is really busy is a significant challenge. This year we took a different approach. Manual crew collections and transit-based cage vehicles were utilised, as well as our main refuse collection vehicles. So not only did that increase the frequency of litter collections, but also the ability to get to areas that were crowded. We put in 400 additional Euro bins into seafront locations and over 100 more into open spaces. So in the seafront locations alone, over 440,000 litres of rubbish capability within the seafront locations. That also meant that we were able to collect more waste and also made sure that people had easy receptacles to access. We also had a seafront partnership with Hubbub around litter education, so the utilisation of drone technology to inform us where litter was placed and what type of litter that was, as well as some really fun and quirky new elements around stickering around the bins themselves, interactive bins that talked to you or gave you options to vote, around making sure that we are looking at more sustainable methods around litter and also making sure we're disposing correctly. So the outcomes of that service, we've had 2,093 tonnes of waste collected. The majority of that has been correctly disposed of into waste bins. So we did have 105 tonnes of litter on the beaches this summer. Comparably, other seaside locations have also had similar issues. So there was one local authority in one busy weekend that had 300 tonnes of litter on its beach. So 105 tonnes of litter left on our beaches over the summer period from April through to the end of August. It is not as high as other locations, but that doesn't say that that's a figure that we should be happy with. But we have had a 16% increase in waste collected from 2020. So that is going to be indicative of higher footfall, but also both the increased resource and the increased bin capacity that we've had as well. Moving on to traffic management. So traffic management, we have had the creation of 2 park and ride services. So the Kings Park Park and Ride service started at the end of May and ran through until just after Air Festival. And then the Civic Centre Park and Ride started for the duration of the school holidays. We also had Park and Cycle. So those Park and Ride services have had national, regional and local media and radio-based campaigns to tell people about them, making sure that anybody that was within an hour's travel of BCP was told about that park and ride. They were also told about alternative car parks like Avenue Road and Richmond Gardens that have historically been underutilised in the summer. We had community safety accredited officers offering traffic management in key car park locations. So making sure that when our car parks were full, that they were directing traffic correctly in order to ease any congestion. Our network management team through transport and engineering have been supporting making sure that the congestion on the roads is kept to a minimum. They've been updating the live electronic messaging signs and making sure that the right messages were going out through our communications channels to tell people where there were congestion on the network. And we also had 2 temporary traffic restriction orders in place at Sandbanks and Pier Approach. Now, those restrictions were enacted in 3 times over our busy weekends. So what that allowed us to do was to restrict traffic to residents, emergency services, public transport, and in the case of the Sandbanks traffic restriction order for ferry transportation as well. It allowed us to make sure that the congestion and then the ease around the network and the wider network allowed it to flow a little bit better. What we did have is over 8,000 people utilising the park and ride services. So on our busy weekend of the 17th and 18th of July in particular, 1,200 people utilised the Kings Park Park and Ride site, showing us that actually when we are at significantly peak levels, making sure that we were communicating and telling people that our car parks were very, very busy, that we were pointing people in the right direction to the park and ride services. So 6,600 people utilised the Kings Park Park and Ride, and about 1,700 people utilised the Civic Centre Park and Ride. On to parking enforcement. This has been a significant success this summer. The team should be congratulated on the efforts around enforcement that they have put in. We've had 59 civil enforcement officers employed. It's a 25% increase in resource, and there has been a massive recruitment drive to get civil enforcement officers, both agency and permanent recruits, in time to deliver for the summer period. So we've had 15 additional civil enforcement officers. We've also had 2 dedicated towaway services to remove illegally parked vehicles. So obviously that was something that started last summer and something that we've continued with this summer. So over the summer period, we've had 43 illegally parked vehicles towed away. We also, after the 12th and 13th of June, decided to put those tow trucks at key locations to deter illegal parking. So parking them on areas like Evening Hill, parking them on areas like Durley Roundabout, as a deterrent to show people we are serious about towing your vehicle away. And that happened in 43 cases. On top of that, we did have just shy of 40,000 penalty charge notices issued. So that's a significant increase in from last year, 10,000 more than 2020 and nearly 4,000 more than in 2019. Now, the fees around the penalty charge notices are capped by central government. So there has been some media interest this year talking about the fact that, it's a £35 fine or £25 fine, dependent on what level of the fine is and if it's paid within 14 days. Unfortunately, that is something capped by central government. But regardless for that, just shy of 40,000 tickets it is a really positive approach. And it's making sure that we're balancing the resort management and the destination management, but making sure that we're telling people what behaviours we expect from them. And I talk a little bit more about that in the communications section shortly. Our Beach Shack app is another significant success. It's something that has had national rollout. We looked into rapid development at the beginning of the season, and the team delivered enhancements, including the car park availability, first aid points, utilisation of safe place locations, which is a national scheme, but allowed us to tell people if they are at risk, they have somewhere to go, and they can seek the RNLI or they can seek our local offices for help and support. And it also gave some wider information as well, which beaches you could take a dog to, which ones you couldn't, and the communications campaign on local national radio to promote that Beach Check app, telling people to download it in advance so that they could check where was available to park, so that they could check which beaches were busy. We had over 60,000 downloads over the summer, so that's quite a significant amount of people, and over 37,000 people used the app to check for where available car parking was, which was something that was brand new to the app earlier in the springtime. Mitigating negative behaviours, so not just antisocial behaviour, but wider negative behaviours as well. We've worked significantly in partnership, and we talk about partnership working shortly. But this is something that we've taken as massive value that you can't put a financial figure to. Mitigating negative behaviours has been a massive partnership approach, and the police have been our core partner within that. What we've done from a BCP perspective is delivered enhanced security. So we've had security in not only our seafront locations, but also our key open spaces and our nighttime economy 24/7. So as I said at the beginning, when we created this, we didn't know what the roadmap looked like. We then found out that we were going to have a nighttime economy reopening, and we wanted to make sure that the NTA were supported to reopen safely. So elements like COVID marshals that were then transferred into taxi marshals, increasing security in places like Poole Quay, increasing security in places like Ashley Cross, up Old Christchurch Road, making sure that there's a visible uniform presence there within the nighttime economy, because we weren't just experiencing visitors during the day, we were experiencing visitors, we were experiencing an increase then of things like stag and hen do's back into our nighttime economy. So making sure that we were enhancing the benefit of the service enhancement as much as we possibly could. We have installed additional CCTV. So there have been 71 CCTV cameras that the MAC have been able to monitor. So on top of our general monitoring through our main CCTV control centre, we've had additional monitoring through the MAC itself. They've had access to 71 of our main CCTV cameras in the key locations. So that looks at open spaces, it looks at Poole Quay, it looks at seafront locations, it looked at Muddyford, it looked at Highcliffe, and it looked at a number of the travel interchanges as well. So that again, we could look at that live visitor influx. We've also had 9 additional CCTV cameras installed, including thermal imaging cameras on our piers, which have allowed us to look at things and make sure we've got early detection of things like cliff fires. It's helped us work with our RNLI and Coast Guard partners around dangers within the water and people stuck within the water. And it's also given us a really broad view of the seafront from a completely different perspective. So both Bournemouth Pier and Boscombe Pier have these cameras installed on them. So there's been an enhancement to the general CCTV network, which has also then improved the safety of our residents and visitors. We've had increased youth engagement hours. So engagement and education of our young people is really key. And as we've had quite a nice summer, we have had groups of young people. So our youth engagement team have gone out on generally a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night in key locations to make sure that the well-being of our young people and the education has been present. On top of that, we've also had additional BCP employed CSAS staff, so they deal with antisocial behaviour, things like street drinking, things like begging, and they've been patrolling in both key locations and at key times. So the outcomes around that, security attended 1,700 incidents. Now that could be anything from a dog on the beach at the wrong time of the year, to illegal camping, to a minor first aid incident. 1,700 incidents is reflective of a busy seaside resort, and the security were there to support us with our bylaw enforcement overnight. So members will likely recall that we discussed at the last overview and scrutiny the notion of waking our illegal campers up through the summer period. So we did that, and we make no excuses for quite a hardline approach on that, and making sure that that was relatively noisy, so that people that were breaching those bylaws were aware that those behaviours weren't permitted. And we have looked at prosecution for 9 of those cases as well. Moving on to communications, making sure that we had a robust communications plan was absolutely key to the delivery of seasonal response and the enhancements. Live communications messaging at peak times has been absolutely invaluable. Being able to tell people which car parks were full, being able to tell people which beaches were busy, being able to tell people, which areas to avoid from congestion has been absolutely key. And it's been really useful to work alongside messaging for elements like Festival Coast Live and also our destination marketing to make sure that we are giving that really balanced approach, and making sure that we've got that the offer to come to BCP, but also the expectation of our visitors is clearly defined as well. We also had a dedicated negative behaviours campaign called Sort It Out, which was relatively controversial and quite hard hitting. The behaviours that it targeted, so illegal camping, fires on the beaches, antisocial behaviour, litter, and illegal parking being the key ones. What we had was very, very prominent signage. But banners on the piers, we had signs in key locations dependent on where we generally see those behaviours. And it did see a reduction in all of the negative behaviours targeted. So a prime example of that is in July. It was launched at the very, very end of July, ran for August and then ended at the end of August. We had 34 tonnes of waste left on the beach in July. We only had 7 in August. So that also combated with the enhancement in resource that we've had, and also the hardline approach that we've taken to negative behaviours. Holistically, it has shown a decrease in negative behaviours across the month of August. We also had 300, so the outcomes of this, we had 310 social media posts. So they were the live messaging, they were programmed messaging, and proactive messaging. 4.6 million impressions. So that's the people that had seen it and interacted with it. And the reach of those posts as well. So 3.2 million people across the country, maybe even further afield, have seen our posts and actually physically viewed them. So making sure that we were getting those messages out, not just locally, but also nationally, so that our visitors from further afield were aware of the messaging that we were trying to put out. So as I said, we do have our police colleagues with us today for any questions shortly. But partnership working is something that we really cannot put a value to. It's not something that we put a physical service enhancement value around, but it's something that we've worked on really heavily with not just the police, but other blue light services as well. The partnership working has actually left us with a real legacy. The protocols that we've been able to put in place, the joint working arrangements, and also the shared learning, and the real adaptation to the delivery that we've all been able to see and that we've all had a part in working together on, is something that will really inform how we work in future years. It makes our services more efficient, and it also has that collective resource as well. So we've had a dedicated police inspector in the MAC when we've been at trigger level. And also the police have dedicated up to 12 police officers specifically to seafront and open spaces locations. Now, those officers have been on foot, they've been clearly visible, clearly identifiable, and have worked both to tackle issues that have come up, but also offer that uniformed presence and that deterrent. There have been joint working protocols for things like illegal encampments, antisocial behaviour escalation, and also the deployment of resource. So for elements like illegal encampments, we've jointly utilised the Section 61 process around disorder in 4 separate occasions this summer. Now, that's a process that is used for very, very serious cases where there is significant crime disorder present, and it's the police and the council working together to remove an unauthorised encampment. But that's not something that's happened in previous years. I can personally recall the last time that we did it was in 2017, but 4 times within the summer period is really significant. And what it's allowed us to do across the piece is look at how we work within ourselves and our processes with BCP, but also how the police work, and then jointly solidify that working process going forward. We've also had with our wider partners both an in-person multi-agency command centre and a virtual MAC as well. We've had twice daily briefings, which have allowed us to share intelligence. It's allowed us to say what's going on in general, what the impact is on the different authorities, and then also what we're predicting for the rest of the day or through into the evening. So it does give us that real multi-agency approach, and also allows other agencies to tell us what their pressures are, so that we can work together to make sure we're mitigating them as much as possible. At the end of the season, we did go out for partnership feedback. So the core agencies that we've worked alongside, we asked them how they felt that the summer had gone, their views of the seasonal response delivery, anything that they thought that we could improve on in future years, and also, you know, the general opinion as to whether or not they'd support the extension of seasonal response. So the agencies did support the extension of seasonal response. I think, you know, as I've said, we have got a busy tourism economy, and other agencies recognise that as well. The agencies felt that they were engaged in multi-agency delivery, and overall the agencies felt that the seasonal response delivery was a success. So that's all really, really positive. And also that partnership feedback, there were elements around it about tweaking our trigger levels, how quickly we can inform people if we're scaling down or scaling up with our resource, and that learning has really helped us. So this was always something that was very, very new. It was something that we tried and we learned continuously through the summer period, and it's something that, you know, now in future years we can continue to build on. We also had a Cabinet Office visit earlier in the summer, and they did uphold BCP as best practice for visitor influx. So noting the elements around data and how we utilise data, looking at the response to that visitor influx, and they praise it within their overarching report. From a financial perspective, as we said earlier, there was just shy of £3.5 million allocated to seasonal response enhancements, and those funds have been ring-fenced to this financial year. So it came from our Tranche 5 COVID funding and our Contain Outbreak Management funding. So the initial financial analysis we undertook was prior to the lockdown roadmap release back in February, but we did make sure that with everything that we were planning, that we had those scalable services based on demand, and also services that could adapt to the pressures and also the changing COVID pressures as well. The expenditure that we've had has informed future proposals within the medium-term financial plan that's currently under consideration to look at whether or not we can deliver seasonal response as core service. And overall, we've had an underspend of 867,000. Now, that includes a contingency allowance that we'd given ourselves of 200,000 that we haven't had to utilise. So generally an underspend of, within the core functions, 600,000 pounds. And final thoughts before I open it up to all of you and hand back to the chair. We have had a considerable improvement in partnership working and the legacy arrangements, something I really can't stress highly enough. Despite the fact that we've had all the financial input, our partners have been key to this, and there's been a massive amount of thanks given to them and continue to be given to them around the delivery and the joint and also the prioritisation. This was a BCP delivered project, but our partners have come on board and supported our delivery and had the same enthusiasm for this as we have. The enhanced resources have informed our requirements for future years as a growing tourist destination, and making sure that in future we have scalable services. That is a key. It is key as demand is really unpredictable. Many visitors choose on the day to visit, and as we've seen this year, the weather has been significantly unpredictable. So that's it from me.
Councillor.
And can I just add one final comment? I'm sorry, everyone's been waiting there patiently. Probably something wasn't mentioned, or maybe it was at the beginning, but it underpins all of this, is please on record a great thanks to all the officers involved. In fact, maybe I should start by saying actually my genuine thanks to all the councillors involved in this, because what I felt throughout the summer, through all of this, is a genuine, constructive sort of let's help get this right for everybody's sake in all of this. I'd like to put that on record to all councillors. But the secondly, and probably more importantly, if you don't mind, is to all the officers involved in this, because even though we have talked about arrangements and money and so on, and of course that's very, very important, there's always that moment when an officer is in front of a rather challenging person, whether it be on the seafront or somewhere else, and actually it's just that person's ability to deal with that situation calmly, effectively, professionally, and without provoking further incident. And of course some of our agencies may be more used to this, but nothing takes away from that being rather frightening at the time. And particularly this year, sometimes we've had challenging behaviours caused by people's genuine ignorance about what they can and can't do under the different situations of lockdown and COVID restriction. And then in other situations, it's to do with something more rather aggressive and unreasonable. And all those situations, I must say, have been handled astonishingly well by a huge number of officers going well beyond the mark. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stribley.
Chairman, I have to say a lot went well, and for everybody who did a good job, yes, I would certainly echo Councillor Anger's congratulations. But just a few comments. Yes, the large Eurobins give much greater capacity for waste, but they actually are rather high and the lids are rather heavy, and small people simply cannot use them. And I've seen a number of children of 10 or 12 or 14 appropriately sent by their parents with a bag of rubbish and simply not being able to put it in. I've also seen on a regular basis the refuse lorry coming along the promenade, lifting the lid and moving on. because the bin was less than a half full, so they didn't bother to empty. Well, of course, when that stays for a few the time the lid is lifted, there is a foul smell that comes from it. And when I did challenge one team, why aren't they empty? Oh, well, we don't empty it unless it's well over half full. It seems to me a little bit of a nonsense that they're not emptied each time the vehicles go along. The park and ride, yes, it's rather sad the Civic Centre didn't do better because I appreciated it. But the signs for the Civic Centre, when the beaches are full, need to be on Parkston Road and on Fernside Road. The signs I saw were on Park Road along the little cut through there, and vehicles travelling to Sandbanks are already in the near side lane of 3 when they need to be in the offside lane if they're going to use the park and ride. So I think the signs saying beaches full, please use park and ride, need to be better placed. And because the Civic Centre park and ride is a bit hidden if you don't know this block, needs to be much better signposted. The other thing, it said park and ride £5. Didn't say £5 per car, which would have encouraged many more people to use it. But a number of people said, well, there were 5 of us. We didn't want to pay £25 to use the park and ride. I know it's a simple thing, but, you know, a number of people certainly didn't use it because of that. I absolutely agree we shouldn't have fires on the beach. It's a very sad reflection. I have a picture somewhere of one of our councillors sitting enjoying a fire lit on the sand. Fortunately not in my ward, and I'm not naming names here, but it happens. The promenade was not, in the Shore Road area at least, was not properly cleaned until after the end of August. In spite of many complaints, little bits were done, lots were left. None of the steps up to the beach huts were cleared. None of the areas around the water taps were cleared, except by some of the beach hut owners who did it from time to time. And behind the beach huts hasn't been cleared for years, as far as I'm aware. And I was told once, well, they're done at least once a year. They've not been done in the last 10 years, to my certain knowledge. So I agree it's a huge problem. We have a lot of beach. We have, 10, 12 miles or more of it. It's going to take a lot of cleaning. But I have to say, on my visit to Muddyford a while ago, I was so impressed with the cleanliness of the whole place. Pity I couldn't say the rest about all the beaches, perhaps along the rest. And again, with scooters and bikes on the beach, most users were considerate, polite and careful. But as ever, there are some who use their scooters as fast as they can or their bikes as fast as they can. And when there are small children dodging across the promenade, as they're entitled to expect they can do, that to me always seems to be a disaster waiting to happen. And the only other last little thing, quite often bikes are chained to the handrails, helping people up the steps from the beach up to the promenade, where we have a difference at the pool end of height between the beach and the promenade. And a lot of disabled people use them, and they do rely on those rails. I did once or twice mention to one of the passing wardens, oh, this bike changed that handrail. I think the people are down at the beach, and more or less said he couldn't do anything about it, where I think perhaps a polite word would have been able to help. Only little things, but they are irritants to people who are using the beach. So I don't have a problem with the general use, but there are small things which a bit of extra attention or forward planning could have dealt with much better. I've had conversations with Councillor Iyengar over this through the summer, and eventually it got sorted, but it should have been sorted before the summer started rather than when the summer ended. So that's my little comment, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stribley. Yes, a lot of observations, which I'm sure will have been noted by the portfolio holder. And indeed, I've already had one message from Councillor Green saying that your issue about the signs regarding the parking, the cost of parking, were changed after you had reported that to him. Okay, but I'm being told that they were changed, but nevertheless, a lot of observations, which I'm sure will be taken on board. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure everybody here and listening is absolutely horrified by the amount of tonnage of waste that we have to pick up after people in the town and on the beaches and everything. And I think that's not something BCP can sort out by itself. That is a countrywide thing, is to trying to educate people on the food and drink industry and everything. Do we really need all this packaging and all these plastic bottles and everything, and bringing it to our seaside and it ending up in our sea or buried in the sand and everything? But can I just make a comment about the banners that were placed in certain areas? I had people saying to me that they did find them slightly offensive. Obviously, the asterisks were so that the words SH were taken out. And as you say, the banners were effective, and I'm quite happy that they were effective. But do you think we could perhaps have maybe slightly more humorous banners in future, not ones that to a lot of people were offensive or mildly offensive? And can I just ask something about, you mentioned the sustainable transport, the cars. Did you actually count how many people were actually using electric cars? Because I presume we would count those as sustainable transport. So, you know, some of us quite like our cars and are going to be very reluctant to give them up. It's a very comfortable way of travelling. So I don't like cars just all being seen as not sustainable transport, but when people have got other means with the electric cars and things. And hopefully, are our deck chairs coming back next summer? So we don't have these comments on the national newspapers about weaponised deck chairs.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Well, again, a list of observations, but two specific questions. Do we have an electric car counter? And the other, are we going to have our deck chairs back next year? But the others are observation. Maybe I could invite you, Councillor Iyengar, to come back on those 2 points.
Actually, Chair, just to, without knowing how many other members of the committee want to speak, would you want me to respond now, or would you rather take them all and then?
Well, let's see. No one else has indicated that. Oh, yes, they have. Oh,
yeah, I thought there might be quite a few.
Let's take those. Let's take them then as they come along. Sorry, I hadn't seen those.
Okay, all right.
Come along,
Vice
Chair, buck up. Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me. Please go ahead, Councillor Iyengar.
Okay, I'll quickly cover it. I just wonder if those also dialing in may have something to add as well. On the on your points, thank you. First of all, Councillor Stribley, all of them noted, thank you. And I think some we've done, some we've not done, but all absolutely noted. Thank you very much and for action. Jackie, on yours, noted, I had a few comments, obviously having a ward right next to the beach, I had a few comments, which is, that's not quite Dorset, that's not quite Poole, for instance, and so on. It depends, if we judge it by results, and I think Sophie mentioned, even on a like-for-like basis, it absolutely had an effect. So let's maybe reconcile that this is a pilot, it's a test, because I agree with you, there is something there that is a bit like, are we going to continue with that language? And personally, I prefer we didn't continue with it, but I'm also keen for results, and not just to make the place look pretty, but actually for everybody's kind of well-being as well. And I think we're going to have to find a middle way between the two. But your points were made, thank you. Did we count the EVs? To my knowledge, no, unless anybody from transportation on it thinks disagrees. I don't know how we can, but it's a good question, very much. Deck chairs, can we carry that one forward? Because obviously there is some, in some way, we'll get the deck chairs back, and let's take that sort of away, and then just see what the plan is for the summer coming up. as well. And obviously that will depend on this really, COVID regs and so on, if there are some still to observe next summer as well. Okay.
Thank you. Right, we're going to have Councillor Slade, followed by Councillor Denman, followed by Councillor Rigby. We also have a request to speak from Councillor Hadley, who I'll take online. That then will be it. And I want to try to close this debate by 4 o'clock to give us enough time to talk about the next item. So, Councillor Slade, thank you.
Thank you. I will be as brief as I can. I'm not even going to get into deck chairs. A couple of issues I've got around the success or otherwise of the park and ride in Poole. 1,000, well, pretty much 1,700 people over 6 weeks. That's 250 people a week. What we don't have here is how many vehicles that was. If most people are going to be in families of 3 or 4, that's potentially less than 100 vehicles a week over the summer. By my reckoning, that doesn't sound like it would have been cost effective. It doesn't actually take that many vehicles off the road. So I'm just wondering what thoughts have been given to doing it better next year. I'm a huge fan of Park and Ride, but I just don't think it worked for Poole. Kings Park seems to have been more successful, so I'm interested to hear about that. So how much revenue did we take on it? Also about plans for footfall monitors elsewhere. It's interesting that we've got such detailed figures about peer approach, but not about Shore Road or Sandbanks or Branksome Chine or even Muddyford Quay. That data, I would love to understand what we're doing about getting that. I'm disappointed that there seems to be an acceptance that the government set the levels of parking charge. I think we should carry on the fantastic work Helen Taverner was doing around lobbying through the Parking Association on getting those fines increased. It's an absolute disgrace that in London they can charge more, but we can't. And can I just get some clarification around, we parked the tow truck on the roundabout to put people off, but we couldn't tow people from roundabouts because they weren't blocking the roads. And I think we should be checking more carefully about the reasons why we're allowed to tow people, because it sets, 43 people is great, but it's only 43. So what's the plan for continuing that year round, extending it, where if you're only doing 43, it suggests that if you've got 2 tow companies on standby, you could probably go to some roads. I understand Lewis's road, he reckons he could do 43 in a week or even a day. So why not use that service elsewhere in the residential areas and the towns where there probably is a need for the tow facility? Can I just ask, I'm really pleased that there was a huge acknowledgement there that this money did come from central government to make this happen. I'm grateful that was clarified, but we obviously don't expect to have this money next year. So there's £3.5 million which we aren't going to have. And looking at the finances, and I know you're not finance, so I'm not going to ask you to account for the bigger picture. That's a big old hole. And if we're going to be successful with this next year as we have this year, what provisions being made to take the best of and improve on it? Thanks.
Thank you. Save the best question till last. Yes, which is one that I was going to ask. Councillor Iyengar, do you want to come back on those points now?
Okay. Could I say the questions? I'll pick up the last one, and if I may come in at the end on that one, is that I just wonder the ones about the park and ride and the PCN increasing the standard charge and about the tow truck. I'm just mindful that to give justice to the answer is more detail maybe can be usefully. I think I can see Richard Pincroft on the call, and I don't know if my colleague Councillor Mike Green is on the call as well. Can maybe give a slightly more detailed answer than I could give on this one. Can I invite either of them to come in on this one, please?
Yeah, Councillor Green, do you want to kick off?
Shall I just comment on a couple of them? As far as the towing is concerned, we did obviously have to make a decision as to where the contracted tow trucks could have the most effect. And so I think it was absolutely right that what we did was to ensure that they were in the place that was likely to make the most difference. This isn't about revenue raising. This is about ensuring that we have the best effect. So the decision was made, and I think it was correct, to position those where they would act as the most deterrent, because that is what we were after doing. And I think it is just worth noting that while 43 may not be a huge number, it was a considerable increase on the 9 from the previous year. So I think we recognise on that one. As far as the numbers coming from the park and rides are concerned, the number in the park and rides, I agree with Councillor Slade. It would be great to get those numbers up, and I think if we operate them again, we should look at how to do so. I don't think I'd say that, you know, even if it was only coming from the Poole Civic Centre, that having the 100 cars isn't that much. Well, it sort of is. If we're stopping them going on the busy days down to the areas that are causing the problems. But it would actually, she's absolutely right. If we can do anything to increase them, then we need to look at that, and we need to look at whether they make economic sense or not. This is the first time that it's been done from the Poole Civic Centre. Obviously, the Civic Centre car park was not used on Saturdays and Sundays, so that was an open goal for us, if you like, on that one. So we can see how to go from there. As far as the fines are concerned, absolutely, this is something that actually we've been lobbying for since pre-BCP days, certainly in Bournemouth Council were, and I imagine the same was true in Poole. And we are, I've met ministers over it. We've had a resolute no on that for the moment, but I have got another approach, which I'm hoping may be something that they would be a little bit more receptive to, which would give us an opportunity to identify those high value areas. I think what I'm looking for is a way to convince the DFT that this isn't something that that local authorities could choose to profit from, and I'm sure that there is a way through. And I said I do have some objections, some proposals which I can't outline here, but if they come to fruition in any way, then I would ensure that I make sure people can see them.
Thank you. Yeah, please. But
very briefly, because I don't want to take up much more time, but I just want to clarify, at no point was I suggesting that we didn't prioritise on the seafront. It was simply that if they're only doing 43 over the summer, there's capacity to go elsewhere. And I think the comment that there were only 9 last year is completely out of order, bearing in mind that we couldn't commission it until August. As Councillor Iyengar has been incredibly magnanimous, that 2020 was not a normal year where nobody had any idea of what was going on, and I think I'm very grateful to him that he didn't use that as a negative. So it would be nice if we could carry on in that spirit.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Slade. I mean, yeah, we're getting quite used to these rather provocative statements, which will always provoke a response from the opposition. It doesn't actually add anything to overview and scrutiny, Councillor Green. So can we please cut these out and let's concentrate on the report in question. And so, members, if we could just, clearly the team are going to reflect on the results of their work throughout the summer, and they will obviously try to improve where they recognise there are things that need to be worked upon. So I think what's really useful, if these observations are being made, we continue with those observations, because they may not have been taken into account. And that's what we're after, trying to make sure that, observations are taken into account and improved upon for the future. I think Councillor Iyengar was going to come back on financial issues, which I think is one of the most important issues. How do we maintain this very high bar that the team have put there? And we're obviously clearly very successful throughout the summer. So how do we do that? How are we going to fund it?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've seen you set for the question. Okay, just maybe, you know, at the risk of disappointing, I can only give a somewhat procedural answer to that right now. You know, the big figures on this one, 3.5 million was given. The underspend is what it is, of the order of 800,000. So the net, what was spent, what maybe Sophie and others couldn't share, it's maybe too much detail, is literally where we think of what was spent, what could actually prudently be reined back, because looking at it very critically, actually, even with the flexibility that we had built in, some things were deployed, okay, given what we now know, actually they could have been either not deployed or not deployed to the same extent, or sort of withdrawn faster than they actually were as well. So that will bring the net spend down further, even on a like-for-like basis, with the same amount of protection next year. Another thing in this piece is the government is not saying it won't give any money for next year, and you can bet to your bottom dollar we'll be applying for whatever is available next year, because COVID sadly looks like it's going to be continuing with us for a while. And finally, of course, we are going to be putting into budget and into MTFP a request for money through BCP resources to also manage this situation as well. So that's as far as I can go, I'm afraid, with detail on this, but we are looking to maintain in substance, if not in exact form, what we've seen hitherto. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dedman.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Can I just make a comment on this hubbub litter thing, which is supposed to be fun and quirky? In my naivety, I had no idea what it meant. I just thought it was rather pretty with the little stars. And then a resident pointed it out to me what it meant. So yes, I was then very disturbed. But yeah, so it took me a while to get to it. I know, naive. So that's the hubbub. I really would like to say about the people, because actually there were men, women, whoever, who did our traffic marshalling over at Muddyford Quay and also Avon Beach. They were absolute heroes. They had such abuse. I was absolutely horrified. People were absolutely beastly to them, and they were just so stoic. So that was really, really excellent and so noteworthy. Okay, the only other thing I would mention, we did have a problem, and I can only talk about Christchurch, and I know nobody apart from Councillor Stribley has ever been to Christchurch, although Councillor Iyengar has last week now. We had a seaweed problem, which I won't bore you with. It was excessive this year. And the perception of the residents, and I'm not going to say this was my perception, was, and they say, our problems are being shelved, and we are told because we have so many miles of beach to service. Well, okay, fine, but we're there too at the end. And that leads me on, which is a question, to the Beach Check app. And I've got it in front of me. Does it actually include Christchurch? It doesn't look as though it does. I really don't know. So whoever can answer that one.
Okay, we've got a specific question, and I can assure you, Councillor Dedman, that many councillors go to Christchurch. It's one of my favourite places. Okay, Councillor Iyengar, do you want to kick off on the response about the app, or maybe that's one for Sophia?
You know, on the app, actually, you know, having been in person to Christchurch and the various bit many times on the app, I can't remember if I've scrolled to see if it's included. If I may, though, Councillor Devon, leave open the possibility that there has been a lobby to not include it, because on the west of the Connovation there has been a similar lobby for it to, because actually to keep it quiet. But please, I'll give that no. I'll say no further on that. All right, because it for the reason of not actually advertising it and marketing it widely.
Say, Chairman, to whom have you been lobbying? Because I certainly hadn't been lobbied.
Okay, all right. Let's take this way. I know. Just one second. I know Chris Saunders is on the call right now, and I'll just see if Chris has got anything to add. If that's okay, Chairman.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Saunders. Nice to see you.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say the question speeches are included on the app. We have a slightly different approach to Muddyford Sandbank, actually, where we turn that red fairly early on to actually discourage visits because of the special nature of the site. But apart from that, yeah, the question sites are on the app.
I think he said yes, they were on the app.
Thank you.
I speak Gaelic as well.
Yeah, regarding, have you seen there is a response that's come in also from Mr. Saunders regarding the footfall figures We're looking at other ways of using other digital means to collect visitor data in the other areas of the beaches. So they are looking at it. Thank you.
Chairman, I'm so sorry. I do need to come back, and this is a compliment for somebody, so you'll need to hear it. Over at Christchurch, we have an Olympic path, which a lot of the people in the beach team didn't really know existed. And last week, Councillor Iyengar made a visit, and the speech path, which had been under sand, very, very annoying for people with pushchairs or wheelchairs. Councillor Iyengar came, I think, on the Wednesday, and on the Thursday, the path was cleared. So thank you.
Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and be quick. First of all, on this, Sophie, thanks very much for the report. It's brilliant. It's got loads of data in it, and I think the more data we've got, the better we can do in the future, and the more we can use that to plan what we're doing. So I think the first thing I'll say is thanks. The second thing will be like, you've probably made more work, because I'd love to see it every single year so we can compare what we're doing, right, wrong, what lessons we can learn from the different actions and things like that. One set of figures which jumped out to me, and it is going back to the park and ride, is that just over 37,000 people check the app for car parking, yet the numbers which we use in the park and ride are significantly lower than that. I do think it should be pointing people towards that more, especially when you were saying that 50% of people are sort of making a last minute decision to come here and travelling by car. We can see, I think it's over 75% of people are travelling here by car anyway, so that's even local people walking to the beach and things like that. So what we've got is a lot of people come from outside the conurbation into the conurbation in car, and I think the park and ride locations could probably be worked on. I'd love to see something. I think I've banged this drum for a while and I'll keep doing so. A centralised park and ride, maybe somewhere out by the airport, something like this, which can link to all three of the towns from one point. And then if you go to one, you can still get the park and ride bus and go across to the other towns, so we can bring all the towns together in one sort of connected way. Especially for people who are coming down and maybe staying for a week, don't have parking at a lot of the hotels, could leave their car out of town for a reasonable price rather than paying, more expensive prices in town for car parks. And maybe as well, we can look at different pricing rates for residents who are making their usual trips to go shopping in the town centres, and try and keep the car parking a little bit clearer for them as well. I mean, far from it beats me to say what's going to happen in the future, but with the way that other towns are going, and in a city and in a town, congestion charges coming in and low emission zones, I don't think it's unrealistic to say that in 10 years' time, we're likely to see that in most big conurbations. So if we can sort of forward think on some way to keep people out of these low emission zones, make it easy to access using public transport, I think this data, we can kind of start bringing it together and do some work. Maybe it's not going to happen next year or in a couple of years, but if we can look for, in the future of how this can be used and create a sort of, let's keep cars out of town is what I'm saying basically. And the more we can do it, the more we can use this data to try and find ways to do so, then the better. And it's just a comment really, but everything else absolutely brilliant. I'm really pleased with how things went this summer.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Yes, you've raised some important points. We're reflecting today on the events of the summer, and you've raised some points which relate to that, but also, of course, to the transportation arrangements for the conurbation. And I'm sure that Councillor Green may have one or two points on that, particularly in terms of the parking arrangements, the park and ride, and there are some really good suggestions there. And if Councillor Green is there, maybe he would like to just make a comment on that. Councillor Iyengar looks as if he wants to do. I'm not sure, but that's sort of much bigger than this debate we're having at the moment. But they are really good. I'd be very surprised if Councillor Green hasn't already had discussions about these various ideas already, and it's probably part of his transportation team's work. So if you could just give us a quick one on that, Councillor Green, I'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Chairman. I put it in the chat bar already. Actually, there's some interesting ideas, and yes, some of them have been looked at already. Some of them can be worked on, but I'm going to take away all of those ideas and discuss them.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick because I appreciate you're overrunning a little bit. Just on the electric vehicles, they take up as much space when we're parking them. So I'm not sure it would be sensible to consider them a special. And the other piece of that, in terms of if the park and ride is underutilised, then we've got empty buses running back and forth. So we need to do better in terms of using those. And as part of that, I guess it comes back to the data. So the data is mostly around the peer approach, and I guess that also informs us about the number of people who come by car. But the data report does talk about the 4 pressure points at Christchurch, at Sandbanks, and at Boscombe, as well as peer approach. But we have got data from the car parks, which does indicate that more people parked at at Poole and Christchurch combined than along the whole of the Bournemouth seafront. So there is, I think there is some data we've already got that gives an indication for the spread, which we probably should be using in a more intelligent way. But on the park and ride in Poole, I really wonder whether it's in the right place. And so I guess the question there is, if we've got visitor information about how many are coming down the N3, how many are coming down the A350 or in via other routes, and are we catching them at the periphery and using the app and all the other means to get that working? I think that would be really useful. This is one other thing I was going to raise and I forgot what it was. No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. It's my job to forget things, which I do frequently. Look, I'm going to bring this to a close now. Clearly, there's some issues about park and ride and whether we can improve in that area. I'd like to thank Sophie very much for a very detailed, comprehensive presentation. We're sort of getting very used to the perfection that you strive for, Sophie. And congratulations on the work that your team has done throughout the summer. I've been keeping a close eye on it, and I've been down to the beach a lot, and I've seen it. It really has been a success. So, oh, hang on. I'm sorry. I'm not going to take it. So I'd like to thank you very much for that, and all the other people, of course, that have worked so hard throughout the summer to keep things, and it has been a success. The bar has been set very high. We will have learnt lessons. Not everything would have been perfect, and I'm sure your team will work on that for next year. Let's just hope we got sufficient money to pay for providing similar services in an ongoing way. So with that, I'm going to close this debate now. So. Thank you very much for attending this afternoon. Sorry, Councillor Hadley, but I was really in full swing there, and I do want to get on to the next item and to give it sufficient time for the debate, which is agenda item 8, scrutiny of Poachdown Railway Station improvement, the Cabinet report. Now, we do have a report on this. I'd like to call upon Councillor Mike Green, portfolio holder for the Sustainability and Transport, to introduce this item. Thank you, Councillor Green.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think we started off with a little bit at council that everyone was at. So what I'll just try and do is just give a very quick potted history of what's happened here and where we are at the moment. I know that Julian McLaughlin's here, who'll be able to answer some questions, and I'm not sure whether Paul Whittles is on the conversation as well. No, in that case, I'm going to ask Julian to answer. Adam is here too. So, okay. So the very quick potted history is that this has been something that's been requested very strongly for more than 10 years now. Originally, we were looking particularly for the lifts to be installed for disabled access purposes, and that's been the primary reason. But more recently, we've also been become aware of just how dangerous those steps can be. So that adds an extra reason for doing it. And at Bournemouth Council, we, supported by the MP for Bournemouth East particularly, pushed very hard on this. And the result was, and I'll be honest, it did slightly surprise us, but we were very grateful for it, that when the franchise was awarded to SW or SWT, SWR, there was a commitment there for them to provide the accessible lifts. As their investigations proceeded, but prodded very much by ourselves, SWR realised that they had badly under budgeted for those lifts. The debate ensued with them saying, well, we haven't budgeted enough, so we can't do them, and us, particularly Bournemouth Council, and I would imagine it continued in BCP under the previous administration. It certainly got taken up again under the new administration, but I doubt that there was a gap between them, where they were saying, well, we under budgeted, we can't do it, and we were saying it wasn't the budget that was in the franchise agreement. You said you were going to do it. You are required to do it. And tough luck if it's costing you too much. That unfortunately got overtaken a little bit when COVID came along, and the restrictions are that from DfT came in as to exactly what they could spend the money on and what they couldn't and how they were able to. So that really pushed it along, and the debate became rather moot on that. So what this paper is about is a way to resolve that stalemate, and it actually goes quite a bit further than that as well. As you can see from the paper, there's been a tripartite agreement that there will now be £5.7 million allocated for Folkestone Station. Of that, SWR are putting in the 1.6 million that was allocated and budgeted for as part of the franchise. Network Rail is putting in 1.5 million, which will be for enhancement of their own assets, and BCP is effectively filling the gap by providing 2.6 million from the Futures Fund, which will be financed by prudential borrowing. And I don't know whether Julian or Adam might want to point out that where there have been some updates on the report, there's a slight inaccuracy in that. We're not completely over the line yet, because as you can see, that what Cabinet is being asked to do is to authorise Julian and myself to get to the stage where that legal agreement is in place between the three boards, and some of that is subject to their own internal requirements and their own internal allocation and delegation policies. But I believe that we're pretty damn close to having it there. Effectively, where we're at is the heads of terms have all been agreed, and we now need to go through and make sure that we put it all together. So I'm very confident that we should be there, and hopefully this problem, and it is a problem that has been there for and identified more than 10 years ago, is finally reaching resolution, and I'm pleased that we are one of the three partners that are prepared to get involved and do it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Members, if you don't mind, Councillor Farquhar, I'd like to come back to you towards the end when the members of the board have had their chance. Councillor Edwards, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I say at the outset, I've nothing against having accessible lifts for people. I think that's an absolute priority. What I do have concerns is that we are helping fund private industry here with SWR and Network Rail. And I'm hoping that we're not going to set a precedent here with some of our other local stations. Christchurch hasn't got accessible toilets. Are they going to come to us and ask for money for that? Parkstone has limited help for their people that need accessible means. So I've just got concerns that we are funding two very big industries here who have a lot more money than we have. So, and I would also like to know what the amount of people are that are using the station now. Do we still have the same high number of commuters, the football traffic, etc.? And I want to know what sanctions were taken against SWR for not actually complying with their tender. You know, it's a disgrace, really, and they're coming asking us for money when, as I say, have nothing against helping them, but this is a private business, and I think, you know, as I say, I do have concerns about it.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Edwards. I absolutely agree with that, and was just going to build on that as well. You know, it's not just that I have concerns about it. I think it's actually quite outrageous that we're singling out, you know, one business that is supposed to provide infrastructure and deciding to give it £2.6 million of borrowed residents' money. Like Councillor Edwards said, you know, we've got Branksome Railway Station, we've got Parkstone Railway Station, Christchurch, where we all have accessibility issues. No one can actually use those stations if you want to go a particular way, because you can't get there from the side that you enter the station. So, you know, for me, it feels a little bit unfair that Folkestone is getting this cash injection. I also think the point around the fact that South Western Rail were contractually obliged to meet this cost, not just at Folkestone, but at so many other stations, and they haven't done this yet. And it doesn't just set a precedent for BCP, but it sets a precedent for other councils, more public money going into a contractual obligation that should be privately funded by the businesses who won those contracts based on saying they would deliver that. So, you know, as much as like, this will be nice for the residents of Folkestone, I absolutely agree in accessibility, but the fact we're funding this is quite outrageous. And, you know, again, it's another example of where the Futures Fund is being used to plug a funding gap rather than actually to invest in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Earl. Is there anybody else? Councillor Howell.
Yes, I agree with what Councillor Earl says. I'm particularly concerned that given that in the not too distant future there will need to be a new crossing over the railway in Poole High Street, because the crossing will be closed at some point. You know, it does set a precedent and weaken our position in negotiating with Network Rail. I would though like to ask a question of, it might be more suited to the legal officer, but in section 56 it says, before being in a position to advance any funds to either Network Rail and or South Western Rail, the service unit must ensure that there are appropriate contractual arrangements in place. However, it is worth bearing in mind that any contractual documents provided by Network Rail and or South Western Rail are likely to contain very onerous terms which the council will need to critically assess before agreeing to. So it's a bit difficult to understand what onerous terms might be included, given the fact we're just giving them money. And also I'd like to ask what protections will be in place to ensure that South Western Rail, if it is South Western Rail that goes ahead and does this, doesn't go bankrupt and you know, fail to deliver on the project after us actually having given them money to complete it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Green, we've had three speakers now, all very concerned, and I think it's probably a bit regrettable that this announcement has been made in public about this, that this is going to happen, when actually there's no agreement by the council yet. Not only has it not been through overview scrutiny, but it's also got to go through cabinet and it's got to go through full council. So we're at the beginning of the process of approval, not at the end of it. So I think, you know, for all this to get into the press and to raise the expectations in the way they have, I think is regrettable. Having said that, could I ask Councillor Green to reply or respond to the points made by Councillors Edwards, Earl and Howell? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chairman. You know, basically the answer came to a council question, but just after the cabinet papers had been published. So I think that was a sensible way of going forward. It does look as though, well, I do agree with the chairman about that it's slightly regrettable about the timing. Unfortunately, that was outside our control in that one of the partners released that information just before we were prepared, just before that paper was published. But that's the way that we go. I will probably need to seek officer help on some of it, but just to confirm, as I know officers will, the question of public subsidy has been very well explored, and that's why when you go further down into the paper, you will see that there are that the order in which the money goes in and what that money will be used for is very well detailed in here. And indeed what will happen according to underspends and overspends. The question of basically subsidising a private company, it is something which originally gave me some concern before it was verified by officers about what we were doing, and the fact that what we're putting money into is to assist on the accessibility. I don't know where Councillor Earl says that there is that obligation within the contracts in several other stations around the country. It may be that may be the case, but it's not something that I'm completely aware of, and nor am I aware of exactly what the wording is on the contractual obligation as far as the Folkestone station is concerned. It is certainly not there for Christchurch, for Branksome, or for other stations. So it is specifically there in the franchise agreement for Folkestone station. And as I explained in my introduction, the game changed anyway with COVID, because DfT would not then allow the spending of a further penny above actual contractual requirements to be done by rail companies, because they're effectively operating on behalf of the DfT during and after the COVID times, because they became obviously instantly loss making as they did so. As far as the number of people concerned, that is obviously changing as COVID recovery takes place. But we are talking about more than a third of a million people in a normal year that will pass through Folkestone station. So this is a very large number of our residents, and I actually think that it is an absolutely appropriate way of using our Futures Fund. Similarly, as far as the borrowing is concerned, we're able to do so for infrastructure, and it is the infrastructure that we are funding. As far as Councillor Howell's question on the onerous terms, again, officers may be able to respond to that, but I think the important thing is that we've identified very clearly within this report, not that it was essential to do so, but it's being very open and ensuring that everyone realises that as those terms come in, they will be examined and scrutinised very, very carefully by the council before signatures go down. I have every confidence that will be sorted out, and I know the ward councillors joined me on a meeting with SWR and Network Rail, and they spoke about their business cases and how robust their estimates are, and indeed what their potential is if they do find any overruns, etc. And I was quite reassured by that, rather more than I expected to be honest on that. As far as the two companies concerned, there is no obligation from Network Rail, no contractual obligation for them to come in. They have come in as a voluntary partner, and I hope that what you will see again in the report is it is their contribution is to their own assets and enhancing those, and I think that that's a very sensible way of going forward. Councillor Earl also mentioned about the crossing needed at Poole High Street. And again, I don't believe that it weakens the position at all. Again, we have to get real about this. We have to recognise that there is no obligation for Network Rail to move the crossing, to replace the crossing, or any of those. What it is, as is the case in Folkestone Station, is that we, BCP Council, have found an opportunity to get round the absolute stalemate that exists. There is no question at all that without our contribution, this would not go ahead. That is a decision that has been taken, or will be taken, I hope, by this administration and then by this council, that it is an investment that we wish to make in our residents' future and potentially in the future of those of Boscombe and Folkestone as a place, because having that additional facility for sustainable travel and the enhanced facility is something that will help that place grow. So I do respectfully disagree with those, and I don't know whether either Julian or Adam has anything to add, particularly on the issue of the subsidising the private industry. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, if I may, I'm Director for Transport and Engineering, Julian McLaughlin. Mike's absolutely right. I would want to stress that we're at the outline business case stage for this programme. The approvals have to go through DFT. I have done some checking in the background in terms of the funding allocations, and I've had it confirmed that the in principle funding, that the third parties that's all mentioned in the reports is in place there, but it is subject to DFT requirements and approvals, which will take eight weeks from the time if we agree to fund. The numbers of people are 350,000 people typically through the station, and that's likely to grow as we move towards a more sustainable solution and the greater use of rail. And that's part of a much wider set of proposals for improving the rail industry, which isn't within this report, I stress. But there are plans there for metro-style arrangements, which includes Folkestone. So because we're at the outline business case stage, it's very clear to me that we do need to have further legal views to identify the protection we need and to confirm the detail of what we are able to provide funding for in a legal sense. There's something called subsidy control regimes, which used to be called state aid. So we need to check that, and we need expert advice. And the recommendations asking for this early stage to actually approve that the funding that is used seeks that advice in order to gain the protection for the council that we actually get the reports and the governance correct, as well as the legal agreement. Legal agreement work hasn't started in effect, and we will be moving that forward if we get approvals. Further emphasis is that there's a new rail strategy that's come out that covers the whole of the UK, and there's further elements there that have may well change the position for other stations. Folkestone has never had accessible lifts, and this work, two parts of this work are essential to provide the equality, and members may well have looked at the equality impact assessment at the end of the report, which shows a very beneficial impact for our residents. So that's really all I wanted to add to. Mike's covered most of it, and I'm sure Adam's got views on the financial side.
Thank you. Before you come in, Mr. Richards, just to let members aware that we have got quite a few people that want to speak on this. After I've asked Adam Richards to speak, it'll be Councillor Slade, followed by Councillor Stribley, then Councillor Allison, and then Councillor Earl. So that's yeah, I haven't forgotten about that. But so those are the members on the board. And following that, we've got Councillor Farquhar, and then following him, Councillor Hadley, that have asked to speak, which I will allow. So we've got 30 minutes, so please be as brief as you possibly can. Mr. Richards, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just for the purposes of tape, my name is Adam Richards. I'm the Service Director for Finance for BCP Council. Chair, can I start by an apology to all members, in the sense that it's been a drafting error with this report, in the sense that you will probably have sensed deja vu if you went through it on a line-by-line basis, because sections 35 to 51 were not intended for the final version of the report, because they actually just basically repeat sections 11 to 34. So, you know, please accept our apologies as an officer call for that drafting error. But just to address some of the points raised,
Section 13 of the report hopefully gives members the reassurance that the council is, from a financial perspective, able to undertake capital expenditure on its assets, on third parties' assets, not necessarily assets within the council's direct ownership, and therefore allowed to borrow to actually then finance that capital expenditure. In turning to the point raised with regards to the legal agreement, I think it's very clear that we would expect, if there was one of the other parties to go bankrupt and not be in existence, I think was referred to by the member, we would expect those obligations to then novate across to whoever then picks up their responsibilities going forward into the future. And I think we've been very clear within the report that we would expect there to be some very stringent terms that the council enters into that financial arrangement. So actually, if in the future they didn't maintain those assets and keep those lifts in good order, then we would be looking to recover the sums the council invested into the arrangement. Hopefully that helps, Chair, but happy to support any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Slade.
Thank you. These questions are mainly really for Adam, so just a heads up, Adam. I'm a bit concerned at the comment that SWR are wanting to spend their money on improving their assets. That statement shook me, because if it's okay for them to spend their money on their assets, why are we spending our money on their assets? That bit's not for you, Adam. So I don't mind who answers that bit. That bit really made my blood boil, because it goes to the very heart of the problem with this. I'm interested to know that, and I know this from conversations I had during my time as leader, that Tobias Elwood does support this, but I'd like to know what's he actually done about it. He's supposed to be a very influential MP, so why haven't we got levelling up money for this or infrastructure funding for this? And if we haven't, why not? Clearly it isn't seen as being that important compared to millions and millions that are being spent elsewhere. So, if it's that important, what's he done about it? And the final element I've got, before I make a suggestion to Adam, is where else has SWR and Network Rail applied for this funding? Because I would have thought that this is the sort of project that the LEP should be funding. And I'm wondering if that's because the LEP give loans. And I'm wondering whether we have not considered making a long-term loan, because it's going to improve the assets of the station. It's going to make presumably the station more popular with people, which will therefore increase their income. So they should be able to repay a loan. So why aren't we offering a loan of up to 2.6 million on the basis that we can access it on good terms to kickstart this? And that would then provide a good return for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Councillor Green, I'll start with you on that one, please, because there's some points of principle there, I think. So could you come back?
Sorry, when you say the point of principle, I think I just posted it in the chat bar. As far as the commitment, etc., is concerned, and who's spending on their own assets, what I said is Network Rail. Unless I missaid it, I would apologise if I did. But I didn't say SWR was.
Okay, sorry if it's Network Rail, same thing applies.
Well, the reason for Network Rail spending on their asset is obviously they are not a revenue-based organisation. They are there to present the infrastructure to the rail industry only, and do not benefit from the additional money that is received. Also, they are putting in their 1.5 million. They had no obligation whatsoever under the franchise. Chairman, when it comes to the involvement of the MP for Bournemouth East, I'm not sure how much you want to go into it. Clearly, as someone trying to make a political point on this, but the history and the reason that it's relevant on it is that I firmly believe that without the there were two things that meant that the obligation to provide what turns out to be 1.6 million towards the lifts it came from two things. The first was that one of my colleagues from Boscombe East Ward was in my ear every 5 minutes after I was appointed as cabinet member for transport, etc. in Bournemouth. So that I was pushing on that, and Tobias was pushing and pushing and pushing, so that when the franchise came from DFT, that was the commitment that was put into it. And I believe that without both of those, we would not have had that commitment, and we would not be at this stage, because SWL would say, well, if you want to get to accessible lifts, that's up to you. It's not part of our model or our requirement. But Adam should be able to hopefully respond about the loan potential, and Julian, I see, is indicating as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Richards.
Well, can I just ask Julian maybe to answer his bit, and then I'll come in on the end.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the funding, it's very clear to us right from day one that the way that the rail operation works is that the South West Rail have a requirement for the station itself, and that the Network Rail allocation and their remit is for the track and anything over it. So the Network Rail are involved and have an allocation of 1.5 million to ensure that the bridge which connects the two lifts is of sufficient safe and quality in terms of future proofing it. So that work is identified, and very early on it became clear, because we had 3 sets of pots as the indicative pots, that Network Rail were going to do their bridge bit and walk away if that came to less or whatever. We've negotiated in this early stage the Network Rail, and it's in the outline business case, if there are funds left over from the bridge work, which now is identified through the survey work they've done so far, that if there were surplus funds from their 1.5 allocation, that those would be put towards the rest of the station element, and they've agreed to that. So we've managed to secure the 1.5 rather than it being a shortfall overall. It's very clear, as Mike said in his introduction, that South West Rail have got a shortfall in the funding based on what they originally had allocated, and that they have been asking us to consider the position in terms of covering that shortfall. I would stress that the main risk, I think, is the lifts, although the lifts themselves are not, compared to other rail-based technology and programs, this is not a complex program. So, but the biggest risk for this project is actually the lifts element. We have got considerable contingency worked in within that, and we've made sure that they have put in sufficient contingency, given that we're at outline, and we have actually identified that the detailed costings will be required before we enter into anything in terms of an agreement and so on and so forth. So that work has still got to be done. There's further survey work that they need to do to clarify the position and do that detailed design. And then hopefully that risk will reduce, and the contingency that they've already put in will actually influence the overall costs, hopefully downwards. So in some rail-based projects, it's clear that they go up as time goes on. But this is relatively less complex than some rail projects. So in terms of the overall position, I think we've done well thus far, but we're not at the end of the game. As I say, we're at an outline position. So hopefully the risk will diminish, and absolutely clear that we need financial and legal support to move through. If we do get approval and we do support this project, that we seek out those to ensure that our position is covered, and all of those elements of risk, if things do come up in the future in terms of the build or unforeseen costs, that we are in a secure position and that we don't end up holding the baby.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Richards.
Chair, just to clear, to my knowledge, the option of a loan was not an option that ever came forward for consideration.
Is it something you believe that should be considered?
I'm conscious that in these kind of situations there are specific legislation that when dealing with, if you like, quasi public kind of organisations with regards to what they can and can't actually do. So maybe that was a restrictor from as part of this process. Maybe not. I'm just not close enough to know whether there was ever something that could be entertained.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Before we come, I want to go through the speakers first. Yeah. Okay. So, Councillor Stripley, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief because some of my points have been answered. I'm supportive of this scheme. I think it is essential, but I am concerned that maybe Network Rail or whichever organisation is avoiding its commitments because the Disability Access Act, DDA, has been in force for many years. We had to put a lift into this building to enable people to get to it from the ground floor to the first. Many years ago, I frequently used the lifts at Eastleigh Station going to the airport there. Very easy, you walk in ground level, up, across at ground level and down. And I'm surprised that all railway stations haven't had or should not be working towards that in any event. And particularly we have Branksome and Parkston Station in my ward. If somebody has a disability, they can get aid, but it's not very easy. And there's certainly no, you can get into either side of the station, but you certainly would have to struggle to get up the steps and over the bridge. And this applies to many stations, but they should certainly, I believe, whoever is in control of the stations, be providing that, and whether that is in their bid for franchise or whatever else, it's for other people to decide rather than me. But I'm glad at least that Folkestone, which is a very busy smaller station, is getting this assistance, and I hope the other smaller ones will soon. But whether it's a public purse, I actually think it should be coming from government or elsewhere rather than from the local purse.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'm also very supportive. I think we definitely need these improvements to Folkestone Station, but I do share all of these concerns about where the money is coming from and who should also be responsible. I accept, as Councillor Green was saying, that none of this work would be going ahead if we didn't have BCP Council putting the money in. But at the same time, SWR have run this contract from the government, so to run this network under the provision that they install these lifts. They haven't done that, and yet they've faced no punishment. I also accept that SWR at that time have made a loss, and therefore, on paper, it doesn't look so good for them. But during that time, the share price of SWR has gone up, and they've paid their shareholders dividends. So people are profiting. The people who are shareholders in SWR are profiting. Meanwhile, our BCP taxpayers are having to plug the gap to make sure that their assets, so that they can fill their contract. And I also want to talk just a little bit quickly about, we've talked about how it's BCP Council are putting in £2.6 million, but we know that this is prudential borrowing. And if you look at the paper, what we're seeing is best case scenario with a 2% over 54 years, it's 4 million. Worst case scenario at 3%, it's nearly £5 million. So it's £5 million worth of taxpayers' money in BCP is going forwards to make sure that this company continue to pay their shareholders a profit. And I just think that's a bit of an outrage.
Thank you, Councillor Allison. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say I've already spoken, so if someone else would like to go first, come back to me later if there's time.
Well, if you'd just like to go now, because then I'm going to bring in the ward councillor and also Councillor Hadley, who aren't on the board. Oh, sorry, have you indicated, Councillor? Okay. In that case, Councillor Howell.
It's only to come back on the point that I raised earlier about, ensuring that we don't lose our money in this project. Mr. Richards said that he would expect to see a novation, but a novation wouldn't, didn't give us any rights. What we need is some form of guarantee that the project will be completed, and that if it isn't, that we'll be reimbursed the money that we put forward, or we don't put the money forward until it's completed, or some mechanism that protects our interest in that way. And I'd prefer to hear from the legal officer about that legal consideration rather than the accountant and the financial officer. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I mean, before we get to that point, I think we really need to take a view on whether the project should be funded by the council and whether it should go ahead. And that's the first point of call, I think. Councillor Earl.
Really, it was just to reiterate that point about service improvements, not just in terms of accessibility, which I think Councillor Stripley was really, it's a really good point to raise. Other businesses did have to foot these costs as part of their accessibility obligations, but for some reason the train stations have managed to wriggle out of it. But what I wanted to also ask is about other infrastructure arrangements. So, when we're talking about the train stations, we have serious problems with crime, with antisocial behaviour, with theft at some of our stations locally. And there are some real infrastructure improvements that need to be made. What I want to ask maybe is that we lobby a lot more from these franchisees to actually fulfil some of those obligations as well. And maybe if we are setting a precedent that the Futures Fund is going to be used for these kind of projects, I'd love to look at more ways that maybe we could use that to improve some of our facilities in our other stations, such as at Branksome and Parkstone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the invitation to add to the debate here. As the ward councillor, it's something which I've been working and campaigning for ever since I was elected in May 2019. It's really useful to have this debate. It's really useful to see the answers which are coming out. If I may add some value, is that I think the reason why SW are coming to us is because the answer wasn't given to the question which was asked twice: what sanctions have been put against SWR? But that doesn't move us forward from the position where we are just now. I'd just like to bring the board's attention to point 25, point 26 and point 37 of the report itself, where it actually says of a new lift singular. Now, this is important because it's lifts, plural. The reason it's important is because in the franchise agreement, and I'll just read it, is because they're quite aware of working with train operating companies, e.g. private companies such as SWT or SWR in this particular case. It is very, very specific. And unfortunately, I think this paper needs to be equally specific. And it says here, the franchise shall procure that by no later than the 31st of December 2019, the footbridge linking the platforms at Folkestone Station is fitted with new commissioned and operational lifts, and in brackets, one on each platform, so that such footbridge is fully accessible to passengers with impaired mobility. I won't read the rest of it. It's very short, but it's very much on point as regards what the expectation of the franchise agreement was to be delivered. And it should have been delivered by 31st December 2019, long before COVID made an appearance. This has been an issue before this council, and I know because I brought it to this board in July of 2019, that this was a risk to the franchise not fulfilling its agreements. I particularly wanted to bring the board's attention to this wording because no later than Thursday of last week, on the 11th, the disabilitynewsservice.com released an article relating to SWR services on the Isle of Wight with a headline, "Rail Company Breaks Level Access Pledge, Then Rewrites History." I think we have to be very cautious that the demonstrated performance by SWR in its dealings for the passengers, residents and visitors for BCP has been less than optimal, I think is the political language. So that's my observations there. I would ask a request that the papers are actually rectified on point 25, 26 and 37, that it actually says of new lifts, plural, rather than new lifts singular. I don't want to allow any wriggle room at some later date. On point 36, and this is my question, if I'm allowed, Chair. On point 36, it says 2.6 million will be spent over 3 years. And the paper also refers to the DFT has strict designs and approvals processes. So I don't think it is unreasonable to extract from that we could have some expected timeframes. We've had the big announcement. I'm not sure how the big announcement came about. I hear today one of the parties perhaps jumped the gun. But what residents in my ward and visitors to the whole of BCP are particularly interested in, with those that have accessibility needs, and what they need to know is when are going to be the start and finish dates if this money is approved. In other words, to use the vernacular, spades in the ground, and when the community will be cutting the ribbon for 2 new accessibility lifts. So my question is, when is the earliest can residents and visitors expect to hear about an estimated start and completion dates for the installation and commissioning of 2 accessibility lifts, 1 for each platform, should the council agree to put 2.6 million into the project? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I will ask the, probably that's a question for Gillian McLaughlin, I guess, if you're able to. Clearly, the first step is to get the council to agree to actually fund this project, and we're not sure that will actually happen. But if that were to happen, and all things being unequal as they are in life, when do you think you might be able to start this project? Have you got any guidelines there, please, Mr. McLaughlin?
Yes, and just with a caveat that this is based on what the third-party partners have indicated at this early stage. So what we have is the request of BCP for up to 2.6 million to progress the project due to the shortfall. And if that's agreed through Cabinet and Council, then there will be an 8-week period that South West Rail indicate they will need for DFT approvals to be provided in terms of their own approvals and the scrutiny of DFT for the project to progress. Their best estimate of a timeline for spades in the ground would be for all of those agreements and that we've mentioned previously during this meeting to be progressed, all the parties to be signed up to that, and they estimate that they would be able to move forwards on site towards the end of 2022 or early 2023. And their indication, with their own caveats, is that obviously we haven't got a detailed design yet, so it may well change, but they estimate the rough delivery programme timeline would be 18 months.
Thank you very much. Right, Councillor Hadley, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think that this is a really complicated setup, because the way in which the rail services have been privatised is really complicated. So, as I understand it, South West Railways only lease the station from Network Rail, and as part of the discussions that we had while I was portfolio holder and Councillor Green was writing his introduction, we made quite strong representations to the parties to try and make progress whilst we were in control. But at that point, Network Rail started to get engaged because they said that there would be value in realigning the bridge. And that's partly around some of the other issues that we have, particularly to Folkestone Station, around security and safety and some of the unfortunate incidents at that station. And that was the reason why they said they would put their hand in their own pocket. It's similar actually to, and again, Councillor Green said that there's no obligation of Network Rail at Poole. The obligation for Network Rail is the safety at the level crossing. They hate that level crossing. They'd really like to shut it. And that's the only reason we shut it, is because Network Rail absolutely say we can't increase the trains unless that's in place. So that actually comes from Network Rail. But coming back to the South West Railway had over 100 obligations within their franchise commitment. This was just one of them. And the fact they so badly underestimated the cost is because they didn't investigate it until we forced them through George's intervention and the ONS committee, and them then going away and doing the assessment that they should have done years ago. And as well, in the bit he didn't read out, they should have asked Network Rail to do it. They tried to cut corners and get someone else to do it. So I think there's some real problems about what South West Trains have done. The lift has been out of action for 50 years. I have this really vague recollection as a small child that the station master actually let us travel in it. And I know that back in the First World War, the previous lift was used very extensively for injured troops coming back from the front. It's outrageous that through the whole of the privatised period, this lift has lain fallow and not available to be used. So I think that's really key. The paper talks about us being the provider of last resort. I don't know quite how we enforce that or how we make ourselves the provider of last resort, because it's clear that Network Rail are only going to put their hand in their pocket for the lifts if there's money left over from the bridge. And the bridge just seems to have been demoted to just being a repainting job. There's also no agreement in paragraph 59 about how the cost overruns will be managed. And again, that rings severe alarm bells for me. I think we must do something about the accessibility. Branksome has exactly the same problems as Folkestone in terms of no level access to either platform, and is a category C in the Office of the Rail Regulators assessments of stations. But none of the stations in BCP, or all 8 of them, is category A, fully accessible. So the issue about precedent and about if we want to have a Dorset metro system across the area and increase the frequency of trains, we will end up potentially carrying the can for all of these stations if we accept that we carry the can for this one. So I'd strongly suggest we should be pushing back on, we're spending billions, I think it's 16 billion or something on improving roads from Department for Transport. Why can Department for Transport not find capital to fund this requirement? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Green, your hand's been up for a while.
Yeah, I think it's probably time for me to respond to some of these, if that's right, Chairman.
Yeah, please, if you could be as quick as you could, though, please. Thank you.
Absolutely, Chairman. The first thing is that I agree with an awful lot, apart from that last little bit, what Councillor Hadley was saying, and I might be able to sum up for some of the others from Councillor Stribley, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Earl, about the requirements on SWR. They were very specific, but as I have said a couple of times, the requirements on them have changed during COVID, because the DfT is now in charge of those purse strings, and the DfT has said quite categorically, not another penny. In fact, we had to fight very hard, as Julian will know, to get them to accept that this money, as part of the franchise requirement, should in fact be spent, and they should be coming up still with a 1.6 million. I think 1.2 million was their original number, and it's 1.6 now. As far as George is concerned, the actual date, the franchise was awarded later than was expected. Originally, the date was due to be the 31st of December 19, but it was changed to the 28th of February 20 when the franchise was awarded later. I think it's page 255 of the franchise agreement, if as I'm sure George will be going through everything. I do note and agree with Councillor Farquhar's comment about the need to change paragraph 26, and it's then repeated in 37, which says lift. There are many other places on there in the report where it does specifically say lifts. That S has obviously been missed off in those paragraphs, and I think we should just make sure we will make sure that is confirmed. As Councillor Farquhar says, we want to make sure there isn't a wiggle room. I've been absolutely blunt in conversations directly with SWR, which Councillor Farquhar has been witness to, that I believe that they have wriggled out of their commitment. I do not believe that they should be able to get away with this as long as they have. But in the end, we have a choice to make. It's either do we do this or don't we do this? And I believe that it's absolutely right that we do this. I have to say I am quite surprised about some of the people talking about, we can't possibly be seen to be giving money towards private companies. First of all, I don't believe we are. I believe this is to support our own objectives and ambitions. But are these same the same argument would go that we should never give a bus subsidy? Yellow buses, first bus, of course we do. These are the same people who are asking for more investment in public transport and yet saying, but when it actually comes around to it, maybe we shouldn't do. You know, we've got to get this consistent, and we have a clear view as to where we want to be. Actually, it's interesting that the one of those councillors, chairman, was saying we shouldn't be doing this, and then said, but actually, can we make sure that we do it for all the other stations as well? Come on, let's get real about this. Let's recognise that we have fought and fought and fought to get the position that we hoped that we were going to with SWT and then SWR when the franchise was put in place. We have had to cope with the changes in the regulations that have come and the control that has been come onto every penny of finance, which may incidentally won't be the reason that it cannot be done by lending to SWR and requiring that to be paid back over time. But that's something obviously that can be looked at. But we have fought with them. We have got to where we are, and we will be able through this to provide what has been campaigned for. I feel extremely strongly that we need to go ahead with this. Is it optimal for us? No. We'd have loved them to put their hands in their pocket and to say, OK, we miscalculated. That's all on us. We'll go forward. That could never happen after the DfT got involved. So let's live in the real world and let's try to help these people that have waited for so long for this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I'd have some views on this project myself. They probably echo some of the views already expressed. And the first point is it needed? Do we actually need these lifts? And it clearly, in an ideal world, yes, you would have full accessibility for everybody in every station, and there's obviously a need to provide accessibility. The point is here, though, is the need at this station any more or greater than all of the others? Would it be fair to focus on this one and not the others that require it? And that brings me to the business case in terms of, is it needed for people? Yes, it's needed. But what are the other issues in terms of infrastructure improvements? What are the financial benefits or financial returns of providing this investment, and what return do our residents get from it other than providing access, which is required for that very reason? The business case does not set out any of these benefits. It doesn't quantify the number of people that require accessibility. It just says there's a number of people going through the station, but most people presumably are able to get on the train and have done for some time, but there are a limited number of people that can't. But it's not quantified in any way. So that human need is not actually expressed in the business case. The financial aspect of it is also not quantified at all. It's a wish list of what is required and how much it's going to cost. There is no financial justification for the infrastructure of improvements. So the business case is weak. So if you accept that there is a business case, and there is, I think we all agree, there is a need to provide accessible, who should pay? And that's a critical thing. Who should pay for this? Is it fair that the residents of the whole conurbation pay for this project when there is a clear obligation on a private company to provide it? I think the majority of our residents would really struggle actually with this. But this question has not. They've not had an opportunity to comment on this. Yeah, who should pay? I'm not sure that I could support this. Particularly as the principle is that the South West Rail franchise should be paying for it. They also have an obligation under the law to provide accessibility. You know, and here, for some reason, we're focusing on Folkestone Station. Well, those kind of issues are prevalent throughout the conurbation. I can't even get a disabled access toilet in our local library. It's taken about 6 years to even, you know, it really annoys me that there are so many other things to do, and that this for some reason, this project which is somebody else's responsibility, and they're asking our residents to pay for it. I don't think it's right in principle. So I also think that if this does proceed, it'll be, it will open a Pandora's box. Everybody else will want the same treatment across every ward in a whole raft of different ways, and it won't just emerge in terms of the railway stations. It'll be a whole raft of accessibility issues. Well, if you can afford to spend £2.6 million on it there, where's my £1 million for what I need here and there? And there? I mean, you can just see it happening. So I think it will open a Pandora's box. We should, in my view, make sure that the people responsible for this infrastructure pay for it. Why on earth should a council pay for the assets of another organisation? That's my view. So, Councillor Slade.
Well, I think you should take that to the vote, frankly, but I guess I'm not. I do have a recommendation for an additional recommendation. Should we be so minded to support this, and if it is supported, and I would welcome you actually getting the board's view on whether we should even progress with this. But the recommendation that I would like to be considered, recommendation E, that funding options with the Dorset LEP in terms of infrastructure funding are considered, and failing that BCP Council fully investigate the options of a long-term loan to SWR before committing to making this funding allocation. It feels to me, from what Mr. Richards said, that hasn't been considered, and I think that if there is a vote to support this, and I'd be very happy to go with the vote in anyway. That the very least we should do is have a really strong reason why there is no other option, and I don't believe we have that right now. So I've put the recommendation in the chat, so I'm happy to have that. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to, Chair.
No, I'll come back to it. Councillor Green. Sorry, I will come back to the recommendation again in a moment, but Councillor Green.
Yeah, I just wanted to, there's a couple of things that you said yourself there, Chairman, that I think we should just reflect on. The question about whether these lifts are needed particularly here, this was the place that when the franchise was awarded, was identified as being in the most need and therefore had to be included within the franchise agreement. So I'm not in any way suggesting that there would not be benefit in other stations. I'm sure there would be. But as far as the need is concerned, I think I would be hard pressed to see a station that needs it more than Folkestone does. The other thing that I think is really really important in this one is the fact that the council is match funding. So while the council is putting in £2.6 million, the area and the station and its environments and our residents there are benefiting to the tune of £5.7 million. So there is an extra element in that which would not be there elsewhere, and it is because of that franchise commitment that we managed to get inserted that there is that element, certainly that 1.6 that is coming from SWR, which wouldn't be coming elsewhere. As far as the value for money is concerned, it's at 34B, and admittedly this is in the business case that's presented by one of our by one of our partners, but also it has been adjusted to 50 years. You'll see that there is a benefit cost ratio of 2.46, coming from this. So I think overall we'll probably be content with that. The combination of all those three means that I very much hope that we will be going ahead when I present this to Cabinet, as I intend to, and then to Council afterwards.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Okay, do we need any debate on the recommendation that's been made and seconded? No, in that case we'll go to the vote on that. All those in favour? Nine. Those against? Three. Yeah. Any abstentions? No. Okay. So that recommendation is carried. Right. I think we've really had a good discussion about this, and it's 10 past. Did I?
Yes.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Please go ahead.
And Chairman, I also wanted to check whether or not you wanted to inquire as to whether there were any other recommendations possibly emanating from the floor.
Yeah, Councillor Howe.
Yeah, I think the monitoring officer probably understands what the question is, but just to repeat it, that, you know, how do we, you know, in terms of these contracts as they go, you know, is it likely that we would be able to have some form of guarantee or protection that would prevent us from losing our money in the event that South West Rail goes bust, or and what kind of protection in terms of performance guarantee could we get to prevent us being asked to contribute more than the 2.6 million, which it says is the limit here? Thank you.
Thanks. I do beg your pardon. I'd assume that they were self-evident in the normal contract negotiations. Those would be implicit in any contract, but we will ask. We will ask. I think probably, is it Adam Richins?
No.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so as Councillor Howell will understand, any contractual arrangement will carry with it some risk, and it's very unlikely that we would be able to put an absolute cast iron guarantee in place. But we would certainly, as legal advisors to the council, seek to put contract agreements in place that would minimise that to the best extent that we can. But the reason why the legal implications in this report are quite fulsome is because we really haven't looked at the legal position to any great degree beyond the franchise agreement. We need to check the subsidy control arrangements. We need to check the arrangements between, I don't want to call them parastatals, but quasi government bodies and the authority. And we need to check a number of other provisions before we can really give a view. But we'll use our best endeavours to get the contracts as watertight as we can.
Chair, could I just come back on that? So I think it's important, because it does say in the report that there is a hard stop on £2.6 million that we will be asked to contribute. But we've just heard from the legal officer there that there's probably could well not be any mechanism that could enforce that. So we could quite easily be in a situation where we run out of money, and who's going to have the reputational problem there, and who's going to be looked at to try and fund it? It's going to be the council, isn't it? So it's, you know, if you don't have these performance guarantees in place, you know, and we're being asked potentially to vote for this in full council before we understand, you know, whether those are even possible, you know, by comparison with what's happened elsewhere in other agreements.
Yeah, I agree with that, Councillor Howell. Indeed, we wouldn't be actually running the project either, or running the subcontractors. We would be providing the funding, and then someone else, it would be somebody else's project, wouldn't it? So you don't actually have the control. The only control you have in terms of your exposure is through the contract. So I do agree with you. Members, I have real problems with this. I would like to make a recommendation, another recommendation. I'm going to stick my head up against a parapet here because I'm going to make myself unpopular, I know, with a lot of people. But I do not believe that this project should proceed on the basis that the council is not responsible for this infrastructure. It's responsibility of South West Rail. I do not think it's reasonable to ask our council taxpayers to fund this project. And therefore, my recommendation to Cabinet is that they do not proceed with the recommendations in the report. And do I have a seconder?
Sorry, happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman. Okay, so do we want any discussion on this? No? Okay, those in favour?
6, 7, 8.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you. So that recommendation is carried. Is there any further debate on this matter, members? In that case, I'll close this debate now and we'll close the meeting and come back. Sorry, we're a bit late.
Sorry, Chairman, just before you close the meeting, this room is particularly cold and I've seen emails from other members saying...
It's goddamn freezing.